The letter arrived on a Thursday, slipped into my mailbox like an afterthought, the envelope cheap and thin, the kind you buy in bulk at a drugstore. There was no return address, but I recognized the handwriting immediately. It was my father's. The sharp, angular strokes of a man who had spent his life signing documents that mattered, contracts, deeds, checks that could buy and sell people like commodities. Except this handwriting was different. It trembled. It wavered. It looked like it had been written by a man whose hands were no longer steady, whose world had shrunk to the size of a prison cell. I didn't open it right away. I stood in the doorway of my penthouse, the envelope balanced on my palm, and let the weight of it settle into my bones. My father. The man who had told me, on the day I graduated law school, that I was a disappointment because I had chosen public defense over corporate law. The man who had remarried 6 months after my mother died, trading her memory for a woman half his age with bleached hair and a spending addiction. The man who had rewritten his will on his honeymoon, leaving everything: the family business, the lake house, the investment portfolio, the art collection my mother had spent decades curating, to his new wife, Darlene. His trophy wife. The woman who had called me at my own office, the day after the will was filed, to tell me that I should stop expecting handouts and learn to make it on your own like the rest of us. I had made it on my own. I had built a career as one of the most sought-after defense attorneys in Washington, D.C. I had a reputation for winning impossible cases, for finding the thread that no one else could see, for turning the tide when everyone else had given up. I had a penthouse with a view of the Capitol, a wardrobe that cost more than most people's cars, and a black American Express card that had no limit. I had done all of it without a dime of my father's money, without a word of his encouragement, without a single phone call asking how I was doing. And now, after 7 years of silence, he was writing to me. From prison. I walked into my living room, the envelope still unopened, and poured myself a glass of wine. It was a 2016 Barolo, the kind of wine my father would have appreciated, back when he still appreciated things that weren't Darlene's manicured nails or her endless parade of plastic surgery consultations. I sat down on the couch, the city lights of Washington glittering below me, and I let myself remember. My name is Alexandra Reyes. I am 34 years old. My mother, Elena, died when I was 23, 3 weeks after my graduation from Columbia Law School. She had fought pancreatic cancer for 18 months, and in that time, my father had spent more hours at the office than at her bedside. He was closing deals, he said. Building the empire. Making sure she would be taken care of. When she died, he stood at her funeral in a bespoke suit, his face a mask of grief that I had never seen him wear before, and I thought, for one brief, foolish moment, that maybe things would change. Maybe he would see me. Maybe he would need me. Maybe we would become a family, the two of us, bound by the loss of the woman who had been the only bridge between us. 6 months later, he married Darlene. I found out from a newspaper clipping that a cousin sent me. Real estate magnate William Reyes weds model half his age in private ceremony. There was a photograph. My father, in a white linen suit, his arm around a woman with hair like spun gold and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She was wearing a dress that cost more than my first year's salary. She was holding a bouquet of white roses, my mother's favorite flower. I threw the newspaper in the trash and didn't speak to my father for a year. When I finally did speak to him, it was because he had called me, not to apologize, but to inform me that he was restructuring the estate. He used words like liquidity and tax implications and strategic realignment. He never said the words that mattered. I'm sorry. I made a mistake. You are my daughter, and I love you. Instead, he sent me a letter from his attorney, informing me that I had been removed as the beneficiary of his life insurance policy, removed as the successor trustee of the family trust, removed from the deed to the lake house that had been in my mother's family for 3 generations. Everything was going to Darlene. Everything. I didn't fight it. I could have. I was a lawyer. I knew the law. I knew that my mother's estate had provisions that should have protected her assets, that my father's hasty remarriage and even hastier will rewrite were full of holes that a competent attorney could drive a truck through. But I didn't fight. Because fighting would have meant acknowledging that I still wanted something from him. That I still cared. That the little girl who used to sit on his lap while he read the Wall Street Journal was still somewhere inside me, hoping that one day he would look at her and see a daughter, not a competitor, not a reminder of the wife he had replaced. So I let it go. I let him go. I buried myself in my work, in the impossible cases, in the clients who had no one else to turn to. I became the lawyer that people called when they were facing life in prison, when the evidence was stacked against them, when the world had already decided they were guilty. I learned to find the cracks, the hidden details, the small mercies that could turn a life sentence into a second chance. I saved people. I gave them back their lives. And I never once thought about whether anyone would do the same for me. 7 years passed. My father's name appeared in the news occasionally, always in the business section, always attached to some new development, some new deal, some new sign of his ever-expanding empire. Darlene was in the society pages, her face frozen in that same smile, her wardrobe a catalog of designer labels. I stopped reading about them. I stopped caring. And then, 6 months ago, the news changed. My father's name was no longer in the business section. It was on the front page, above the fold, in letters so large they seemed to shout. Real estate tycoon William Reyes indicted in $200 million fraud scheme. I read the article standing in the kitchen of my penthouse, my coffee growing cold in my hand, the words blurring and then sharpening as I forced myself to focus. It was a sprawling, complicated case, the kind that takes years to build and decades to unravel. My father, it seemed, had been running a Ponzi scheme disguised as a real estate investment fund. He had been taking money from investors, friends, family, colleagues, strangers who trusted his name, and using it to fund a lifestyle that had long since outpaced his actual wealth. The lake house had been sold. The art collection had been auctioned off. The empire, it turned out, was a house of cards, and Darlene had been the one holding the fan. The article mentioned her, of course. Darlene Reyes, the trophy wife, the former model, the woman who had inherited everything and then watched it all crumble. She had been questioned by the FBI. She had been seen leaving the federal courthouse in dark sunglasses, her lawyer's hand on her elbow, her face a mask of controlled panic. She had not been charged. Not yet. But the article hinted that she knew more than she was telling, that she had been the one signing the checks, that she had been the one depositing the money into accounts that the SEC was now calling fictitious. I finished the article and put the newspaper down. I did not call my father. I did not call his lawyer. I did not call Darlene. I went to work, as I always did, and I spent the day defending a young man who had been charged with a crime he didn't commit, a case that would take me 6 months to win, a case that had nothing to do with the man who had given me his name and then taken it away. And now, 6 months later, I was holding a letter from that man. A letter written from the federal detention center where he was waiting for his trial. A letter that trembled. In his handwriting, that looked like it had been written by a man who had finally run out of options, who had finally realized that the empire he had built was made of sand, and that the woman he had chosen to inherit it had already moved on. I opened the envelope. The paper inside was thin, the kind they sell in the prison commissary, and the ink was smudged in places, as if his hand had shaken while he was writing. The letter was short. Just a few paragraphs. But the words on that page were the most honest thing my father had ever written to me. Alexandra, I know I have no right to ask you for anything. I know I have failed you in ways that cannot be undone. I know that the last time we spoke, I told you that you were not the daughter I wanted, and I have spent every day since regretting those words. I am in trouble. Real trouble. The kind of trouble that does not have an easy way out. Darlene is gone. She took what was left, and she left me to face this alone. The lawyers I hired are not the lawyers I need. They are corporate attorneys, used to negotiating contracts, not defending a man who is looking at 20 years in federal prison. I need you, Alexandra. I need the lawyer you have become. I need the daughter I pushed away. I know I do not deserve your help. I know I have no right to ask. But I am asking. I am begging. Please. I am not asking you to forgive me. I am not asking you to love me. I am asking you to save my life. Your father, William the First, read the letter 3 times. Each time, the words hit differently. The first time, I felt nothing. Just a cold, hollow emptiness, the same emptiness I had felt when I read that newspaper clipping about his wedding, when I opened the letter from his attorney, when I realized that my mother's lake house was no longer mine. The second time, I felt anger. A hot, burning anger that rose in my chest like a flame, that made me want to crumple the letter, throw it in the fire, pretend I had never seen it. He had given everything to Darlene. Everything my mother had worked for, everything my mother had loved, everything that should have been mine. And now that Darlene had left him, now that the money was gone, now that he was facing the consequences of his own greed, he was calling me. Not because he loved me, not because he missed me, because he needed something, because I was the only one left. The third time I read it, I felt something else. Something I didn't expect. It was not forgiveness. It was not love. It was something colder, sharper, more precise. It was the feeling I got when I was preparing for a case, when I was sifting through the evidence, looking for the thread that would unravel the prosecution's argument, the hidden detail that would turn the tide. It was the feeling of seeing an opportunity. An opportunity not to save my father, that was too simple, too sentimental, but to finally, fully, completely own the story of my life. He had taken everything from me. He had given it to a woman who had never worked a day in her life, who had never sacrificed, who had never earned a single thing she was given. And now that woman was gone, and my father was alone, and he was coming to me, the daughter he had discarded, the lawyer he had dismissed, the woman he had tried to erase. I folded the letter and placed it on the coffee table. I picked up my wine glass and walked to the window, the city sprawling beneath me, a grid of lights and shadows, of power and vulnerability. I had spent my whole life proving that I didn't need him. I had built a career, a reputation, a life, all without his money, his connections, his approval. And now he was the one who needed me. He was the one who was vulnerable. He was the one who was facing the destruction of everything he had built. I could say no. I could crumple the letter, throw it away, go back to my life, and let him face the consequences of his choices. That would be justice. That would be what he deserved. But as I stood there, looking out at the city, I realized that saying no would be the easy way out. It would be the path of least resistance, the path that required nothing of me, the path that let me continue to be the woman who had been wronged, the victim, the abandoned daughter. And I was tired of being that woman. I was tired of letting his choices define me. I was tired of being the one who had been left behind. I picked up the letter again. I read it one more time, and this time, I saw not a plea from a desperate man, but a question. A question I had been asking myself for 7 years. What kind of daughter am I? What kind of woman? What kind of lawyer? I walked to my desk, the same desk where I had prepared 100 cases, where I had saved 100 lives, where I had built a reputation for winning the unwinnable. I sat down and I wrote a reply. It was not a warm reply. It was not a forgiving reply. It was a business reply, the kind of reply I would send to a client I had never met, a case I had never heard of. Mr. Reyes, I have received your letter. I will review your case file. If I determine that there is a viable defense, I will consider representing you. I make no promises. My fees are non-negotiable. My loyalty is to the law, not to family. If you wish to proceed, have your attorney send all relevant documents to my office by Friday. I will expect a retainer of $50,000, payable in advance. Do not call me. Do not write to me again unless it is about the case. This is a professional matter, not a personal one. Alexandra Reyes, Esq. I sealed the letter, addressed it to the Federal Detention Center, and put it in the mail. I did not feel triumphant. I did not feel vengeful. I felt, for the first time in 7 years, like I was in control. Not of my father's fate, that was still his own making, but of my own. I was no longer the daughter who had been dismissed, the daughter who had been erased. I was the lawyer. I was the one with the power. And whatever happened next, it would happen on my terms. I went to bed that night with the Barolo still half finished on the coffee table, the city lights still glittering below, and the faint, distant echo of a question I had not yet answered. What would I do when my father's life was in my hands? What kind of woman would I be then? The case file arrived on Friday, exactly as I had instructed. It came not in a single package, but in a cascade of cardboard boxes, 13 of them, stacked on a hand truck and wheeled into my office by a courier who looked like he had been carrying the weight of my father's sins for longer than he cared to admit. I signed for them without a word, tipped the man generously, and closed the door. For a long moment, I just stood there, looking at the boxes. They were the ordinary kind, the kind you buy at any office supply store, but they seemed to radiate a kind of gravity, a density that had nothing to do with the paper inside. This was my father's life, reduced to 13 cardboard boxes. His deals, his lies, his empire, his collapse. All of it, waiting for me to open. I didn't open them right away. I made coffee. I sat at my desk, the city waking up outside my window, the morning light slanting across the Potomac. I thought about the last time I had seen my father in person. It was at my mother's funeral, 7 years ago. He had stood at the grave, his face a mask of grief, and I had stood beside him, my hand in his, and for one brief moment, we had been a family. A daughter and a father, united in loss. I had wanted to believe that moment would last. I had wanted to believe that he would see me, really see me, now that she was gone. But he hadn't. He had seen an empty space that needed to be filled, and he had filled it with Darlene. I opened the first box. The documents inside were a mess. Not in the sense of being disorganized. My father's corporate attorneys, for all their other failings, were meticulous record keepers, but in the sense of being a sprawling, tangled web of transactions that seemed designed to obscure rather than illuminate. I had seen cases like this before. The prosecution would argue that it was a classic Ponzi scheme. My father had taken money from new investors to pay returns to old investors, creating the illusion of profitability while siphoning off millions for himself. The defense would argue that it was a legitimate business that had been mismanaged, that the losses were the result of market conditions, not fraud. Somewhere in between was the truth. And the truth, as always, was more complicated than either side wanted to admit. I spent the weekend reading. I read through Saturday, the boxes spread across my office like a paper city, the documents arranged in piles that only I could make sense of. I read through Sunday, my coffee growing cold beside me, the city outside my window cycling through light and dark without my notice. By Sunday night, I had a picture. It was not a complete picture. That would take weeks, maybe months, but it was enough to understand what had happened, and more importantly, what was at stake. My father's real estate empire, it turned out, had been built on a foundation of debt. He had borrowed heavily to finance his developments, leveraging each new property against the last, creating a pyramid of obligations that grew taller with every deal. For years, it had worked. The market was rising, the money was flowing, and my father had become a master of the art of appearing richer than he actually was. But appearances, as I had learned long ago, are not reality. And when the market turned, when the loans came due, when the investors started asking questions, the whole structure began to crumble. That was when Darlene entered the picture. Not as a cause of the collapse exactly, but as a symptom of it. My father had been bleeding money for years before he met her, using one deal to prop up another, borrowing from Peter to pay Paul, creating a house of cards that was always one strong wind away from falling. Darlene was not the wind. She was the fire. She accelerated the collapse, pouring money into renovations, into travel, into a lifestyle that was designed to project an image of wealth that no longer existed. She had been, in her own way, as much a victim of my father's lies as the investors who had trusted him. But she was also a beneficiary. And when the FBI came calling, she had been the first to run. I found the evidence of her flight in the 6th box, buried under a stack of bank statements and loan documents. It was a letter, written on the letterhead of a law firm in the Cayman Islands, confirming the transfer of funds from a joint account in my father's name to an account in Darlene's name only. The amount was $7 million. The date was 3 days before the FBI raided my father's office. Darlene had not just left him. She had cleaned him out. I set the letter aside and sat back in my chair, the weight of the weekend settling into my bones. I had not slept more than a few hours since Thursday. My eyes were burning, my back was stiff, and my mind was crowded with numbers, dates, names, transactions. But I had what I needed. I had the thread. Not the thread that would exonerate my father, he was not innocent, and I was not naive enough to believe that he was, but the thread that would give me leverage. Leverage with the prosecution. Leverage with Darlene. Leverage with the man who had written me that trembling letter, the man who had spent his life building empires and had ended up with nothing but a prison cell and a daughter he had tried to erase. I picked up the phone and called my father's corporate attorney, a man named Harold Finch who had been with the firm for 30 years and had the air of a man who had seen too much to be surprised by anything anymore. His voice, when he answered, was thin and reedy, the voice of a man who had spent the weekend waiting for the other shoe to drop. "Ms. Reyes," he said. "I was wondering when you would call." "I've reviewed the files," I said. "I have questions." "I'm sure you do." The transfer to Darlene's Cayman account. $3.7 million. 3 days before the raid. Did my father authorize that? There was a pause. A long pause. The kind of pause that told me everything I needed to know. "Ms. Reyes," Finch said finally, his voice careful, measured, "your father was not in a position to authorize anything in those final days. He was unwell. Under a great deal of pressure. He had given Darlene power of attorney over certain accounts. It was, in retrospect, a mistake. A mistake, I repeated. $3.7 million, and you call it a mistake." "I call it what it was," Finch said. "Your father trusted her. He loved her. He thought she would stand by him when everything else fell apart. He was wrong. I let the silence stretch between us. I wanted Finch to feel it, the weight of what he had allowed to happen, the failure of his judgment, his loyalty, his duty. I wanted him to understand that I was not my father, that I was not fooled by the language of corporate responsibility, that I saw through the carefully constructed facade of professionalism to the rot beneath. "I'm going to need you to send me everything you have on Darlene's financial dealings," I said finally. "Every account, every transfer, every signature. I want her banking records, her credit card statements, her travel itinerary for the last 5 years. I want to know where she went, who she talked to, what she bought. I want to know if she knew what my father was doing and if she was helping him do it." Finch's voice tightened. "Ms. Reyes, I'm not sure that's advisable. Darlene is no longer a party to this matter. She's made it clear she has no intention of returning to the country. Pursuing her would be a distraction from the real work of defending your father." "Darlene is not a distraction," I said. "Darlene is the key. The prosecution is building a case based on intent. They're going to argue that my father knew he was running a fraud, that he deliberately deceived investors, that he enriched himself at their expense. But if I can show that Darlene was the one who was enriching herself, that she was the one who was manipulating the accounts, that she was the one who had access to information that my father did not, then I can create reasonable doubt. I can show that my father was not the mastermind of this scheme. He was its victim." Finch was quiet for a moment. I could almost hear him thinking, processing, calculating the risks and rewards of the path I was proposing. He was a cautious man, a man who had spent his career avoiding controversy, and I was asking him to wade into the deep end. "You think Darlene was running the fraud?" he asked finally. "I think Darlene was the one who took $3.7 million and ran," I said. "I think she was the one who had power of attorney. I think she was the one who was signing checks and moving money and making decisions while my father was distracted by the collapse of everything he had built. I think the prosecution is going to have a very hard time proving that my father intended to defraud anyone when the evidence shows that his own wife was the one who was liquidating the accounts." I paused, letting the weight of my words settle. "I need those records, Harold. I need them by Wednesday." "I'll see what I can do," he said. "See that you do." I hung up before he could say anything else. I sat in my office for a long moment, the city dark now, the lights of the Capitol glowing in the distance. I was not tired anymore. I was something else. Something sharper. Something colder. I had spent 7 years running from my father, from his choices, from his rejection. I had built a life that was the opposite of everything he stood for, a life of integrity, of purpose, of meaning. And now I was walking back into his world, not as his daughter, but as his only hope. The irony was not lost on me. He had given everything to Darlene. His money, his trust, his future. And she had taken it and run. Now he had nothing. No empire, no wife, no legacy. Only a prison cell and a daughter he had tried to erase. And that daughter was the only one who could save him. I thought about the letter he had written me. I am not asking you to forgive me. I am not asking you to love me. I am asking you to save my life. I had read those words a dozen times, and each time, they had meant something different. The first time, they had been a plea. The second time, a manipulation. The third time, a confession. Now, sitting in my office with the boxes of his life spread out around me, I read them again, and I saw something I hadn't seen before. I saw fear. Real, genuine, human fear. My father, the man who had never been afraid of anything, was terrified. Not of prison, he was too proud to admit that, but of being forgotten. Of dying alone. Of having no one to carry his name, his legacy, his memory into the future. I thought about my mother. About the way she had looked at him, even in those final months, even when he was at the office more than at her bedside. She had loved him. She had believed in him. She had given him everything she had, and in the end, he had given her nothing. Not his time. Not his attention. Not even the lake house that had been in her family for 3 generations. He had given that to Darlene. He had given everything to Darlene. And now Darlene was gone, and he was calling me. I picked up the phone again. This time, I dialed a different number. The number of the federal prosecutor assigned to my father's case, a woman named Monica Chin whom I had faced in court twice before. She was good. She was very good. But she was not, I suspected, expecting to hear from me. Monica Chin, she answered, her voice brisk, professional. It's Alexandra Reyes, I said. I'm calling about the Reyes case. There was a pause. A pause that was, I imagined, identical to the pause I had heard from Harold Finch, but for very different reasons. Monica was not calculating. She was processing. She was a prosecutor, trained to anticipate the moves of her opponents, and she had not anticipated this. I didn't know you were representing your father, she said finally. I'm considering it, I said. I wanted to talk to you before I made a final decision. Another pause. What do you want to know? I want to know about Darlene Reyes, I said. I want to know why she's not in custody. I want to know why she's not facing charges. I want to know why the U.S. Attorney's Office is letting a woman who stole $3.7 million from a joint account walk free while her husband sits in a detention center waiting for a trial that could put him in prison for the rest of his life. Monica's voice, when she spoke again, was different. It was not the voice of a prosecutor facing an opponent. It was the voice of a woman who had been asking herself the same questions. We're aware of Darlene Reyes's activities, she said carefully. We're building a case. These things take time. They've taken 6 months, I said. How much more time do you need? I can't discuss an ongoing investigation, she said. You know that. I leaned back in my chair, the phone pressed to my ear, the city lights still glittering below me. I'm going to give you some advice, Monica. Not as opposing counsel. As someone who knows this family. Darlene is not a victim. She's not a bystander. She's the one who is signing the checks. She's the one who is moving the money. She's the one who had power of attorney when my father was too distracted to know what was happening. If you want to convict William Reyes, you're going to have to prove that he knew what she was doing. And I don't think you can. Monica was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was softer, more careful. What are you proposing, Alexandra? I'm proposing that you take a closer look at Darlene, I said. I'm proposing that you stop treating her like a witness and start treating her like a suspect. I'm proposing that you give me a reason to believe that justice is being served in this case, because right now, from where I'm sitting, it looks like the only person who's being held accountable is the one who's already lost everything. I hung up before she could respond. I sat in my office, the phone still warm in my hand, and I let the silence settle around me. I had done what I came to do. I had planted the seed. I had given Monica Chin a reason to look at Darlene, to question her story, to wonder if the woman who had fled to the Cayman Islands with $3.7 million was really the innocent victim she claimed to be. It was not enough. Not yet. But it was a start. I looked at the boxes, at the piles of paper, at the tangled web of my father's life spread out before me. I had a long way to go. Weeks of work, months of preparation, hours of testimony and cross-examination and argument. I would have to face my father, to sit across from him in a prison visiting room, to look into his eyes and see the man who had given everything to a woman who had left him with nothing. I would have to face Darlene if she could be found, if she could be brought back, if she could be made to answer for what she had done. I would have to face the prosecution, the judge, the jury, the press, the public, all of them waiting to see if the daughter of William Reyes would save her father or let him fall. I thought about the letter again. I am not asking you to forgive me. I am not asking you to love me. I am asking you to save my life. He was asking me to do what I had been doing for 7 years. To save lives. To find the thread that no one else could see. To turn the tide when everyone else had given up. He was asking me to be the lawyer I had become, the lawyer he had never believed I could be. And I was going to do it. Not for him. Not for his forgiveness or his love or his approval. I was going to do it for myself. For the daughter who had been erased. For the woman who had built a life from nothing. For the lawyer who had never lost a case she believed in. I stood up, stretched, walked to the window. The sun was rising over Washington, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. I had been up all night, and I was not tired. I was ready. The federal detention center where my father was being held sat on the outskirts of Washington, a low-slung building of gray concrete and razor wire that seemed designed to be forgotten. It was the kind of place that people drove past on the highway without noticing, their eyes sliding over it like water over stone, their minds already moving on to the next thing. But for the men inside, it was the center of the universe. The only universe. A universe of fluorescent lights and metal doors and the constant, low hum of surveillance. I had been here before many times for clients who had no one else to visit them, no one to fight for them, no one to tell them that the world outside still remembered they existed. But this time was different. This time, the man waiting for me behind the glass was my father. I arrived at 9 in the morning, dressed in a gray suit that I had chosen carefully. It was not my most expensive suit, not the one I wore to court when I wanted to intimidate, but it was not my most casual either. It was the suit I wore when I wanted to be taken seriously without being seen as threatening. It was the suit of a professional, a lawyer, a woman who knew what she was doing. I wanted my father to see that suit and understand that the daughter he had dismissed was now the only person who could help him. I wanted him to see that I was not the frightened girl he had left behind. I was someone new. Someone he had never bothered to know. The visiting room was a small, sterile space, divided by a wall of thick glass. There were chairs on either side, telephones for speaking, and the constant presence of a guard who pretended not to listen, but heard everything. I sat down in the chair on my side of the glass and waited. A few minutes later, a door on the other side opened, and my father walked in. I had prepared myself for this moment. I had told myself that I would feel nothing, that I would be professional, that I would treat him the way I treated any other client. But the man who sat down across from me was not the man I had expected. He was smaller, thinner, older. His hair, which had been thick and silver, was now thin and white. His face, which had been sharp and commanding, was now gaunt, the bones visible beneath the skin. He was wearing the standard orange jumpsuit of the federal detention system, and it hung on him like a costume, a uniform for a role he had never imagined playing. He looked like a man who had been hollowed out, who had lost not just his freedom, but his identity. He looked, for the first time in my life, like a man who was afraid. He picked up the phone on his side of the glass, and I picked up mine. For a moment, neither of us spoke. We just looked at each other, father and daughter, separated by 7 years of silence and a wall of glass that might as well have been a continent. "Alexandra," he said finally. His voice was different. Rougher. Thinner. The voice of a man who had spent months in a place where no one cared what he had to say. "Mr. Reyes," I replied. He flinched. It was a small movement, barely perceptible, but I saw it. He had called me Alexandra, the name my mother had given me, the name he had always used when he wanted something. And I had called him Mr. Reyes, the name I used for clients, for strangers, for men who had no claim on my life. I didn't think you would come, he said. I told you I would review the case, I said. I told you I would consider representing you. I didn't say I would come. He nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving my face. He was studying me, I realized. Looking for something. The daughter he had known? The daughter he had dismissed? The daughter he had erased? I wondered what he saw. I wondered if he recognized the woman I had become. I read the file, I said. 13 boxes. It took me the weekend. His eyes flickered, something that might have been surprise or shame crossing his face. It's a complicated case. It's a mess, I said. You borrowed money you couldn't repay. You used new investments to pay old debts. You created a structure that was designed to hide the truth from the people who trusted you. And when it started to fall apart, you let Darlene take the reins. He looked down at his hands, which were clasped on the metal counter in front of him. His knuckles were white. I trusted her. I know, I said. That was your mistake. He looked up, and for a moment, I saw something in his eyes that I had never seen before. It was not anger. It was not pride. It was something softer, something more vulnerable. It was regret. I made a lot of mistakes, he said. Not just with Darlene. With you. With your mother. With the business. I thought I could control everything. I thought I could build something that would last. And now I have nothing. I waited. I had heard these words before, from 100 clients, 100 men and women who had lost everything and were looking for someone to blame. But my father was not looking for someone to blame. He was looking at me. I'm not asking you to forgive me, he said, echoing the words from his letter. I'm not asking you to love me. I'm asking you to help me. I know what you're asking, I said. The question is whether I can do it. Whether I want to do it. Whether it's worth the cost. He nodded slowly. What's the cost? I leaned forward, my voice dropping, though the guard was still there, still listening, still pretending not to. The cost is my time, my energy, my reputation. I have a practice, Mr. Reyes. I have clients who depend on me. I have cases that matter. Taking on your case means putting everything else on hold. It means working for months, maybe years, on a case that could destroy everything I've built. I can pay, he said quickly. I have money. Not as much as I had, but enough. The account's in Switzerland, the property's in. I don't want your money, I said. I want your honesty. He stopped. His mouth closed. His eyes, which had been bright with the hope of a transaction, dimmed. I want you to tell me everything, I said. Not what your lawyers told you to say. Not what you think will help your case. I want the truth. About the business. About Darlene. About the money. About what you knew and when you knew it. I want you to sit in this room, day after day, and tell me the story of your life. The real story. Not the one you told yourself. The one you've been running from for 30 years. He stared at me, his face unreadable. I had seen that look before, on clients who were trying to decide whether to trust me, whether to tell me the secrets they had been keeping for a lifetime. Some of them did. Some of them didn't. The ones who didn't usually ended up in prison. If I tell you, he said slowly, what happens then? Then I decide whether I can defend you, I said. Not whether you're innocent. I know you're not innocent. You borrowed money you couldn't repay. You misled investors. You created a house of cards that was always going to fall. The question is whether you intended to defraud them, or whether you were just a man who got in over his head and didn't know how to stop. He looked down at his hands again. And Darlene? Darlene is the wild card, I said. She had power of attorney. She was signing checks. She was moving money. She was the one who took $3.7 million and ran. If I can show that she was the one who was making the decisions, that she was the one who was hiding the truth, then I can create reasonable doubt. I can show that you were a victim of her greed, not the mastermind of the scheme. He was quiet for a long moment. I could see him thinking, processing, calculating. He had spent his whole life calculating, weighing risks, making deals. This was just another deal. Another transaction. Another negotiation. She knew, he said finally. His voice was low, almost a whisper. She knew everything. From the beginning. She was the one who suggested the offshore accounts. She was the one who set up the shell companies. She was the one who told me to use new investments to pay old debts. She said it was standard practice. She said everyone did it. I felt something shift in my chest. It was not satisfaction. It was not triumph. It was something colder, something that had been waiting for this moment for 7 years. And you believed her, I said. He looked up, and for the first time, I saw the man I remembered. The man who had built an empire. The man who had never backed down from anything. The man who had looked at his own daughter and told her she was a disappointment. I wanted to believe her, he said. I wanted to believe that I was still in control. That I was still the man who could do anything. And by the time I realized the truth, it was too late. The money was gone. The investors were calling. And Darlene was already making her plans. I sat back in my chair, the phone still pressed to my ear. I looked at my father, at the man who had given everything to a woman who had left him with nothing, and I felt something I had never felt before. Not love. Not forgiveness. Not even pity. It was something more complicated, something that had no name. It was the recognition that the man I had spent my life trying to impress, trying to please, trying to be worthy of, was just a man. A man who had made terrible choices. A man who had hurt the people who loved him. A man who was now sitting in a prison jumpsuit, waiting for his daughter to save him. I need you to write it down, I said. Everything you just told me. Everything you remember about Darlene's involvement. The accounts, the transfers, the conversations. I need it in writing, in your own words, signed and dated. I need it before I go to the prosecution. He nodded slowly. I'll do it. And I need you to understand something, I said. I'm not doing this for you. I'm not doing this because I forgive you or because I love you or because I want to be the daughter you always wanted. I'm doing this because it's the right thing to do. Because you're entitled to a defense. Because no one should go to prison for a crime they didn't commit, even if they committed a dozen other crimes to get there. He looked at me, his eyes bright with something that might have been tears or might have been the reflection of the fluorescent lights. I understand. Do you? I asked. Because if you don't, if you think this changes anything between us, you're wrong. I'm your lawyer, Mr. Reyes. Not your daughter. And when this is over, when you're out of prison or when you're not, we go back to being what we were. Strangers who share a name. He opened his mouth to say something, then closed it. He looked down at his hands, at the orange sleeves of his jumpsuit, at the metal counter that separated us. When he looked up again, his face was different. It was the face of a man who had finally, after 7 years, understood something he should have understood a long time ago. I was wrong, he said. About you. About your mother. About everything. I thought I was building something that would last. Something that would be a monument to everything I had achieved. But all I was building was a prison. For myself. For you. For everyone who trusted me. I didn't say anything. There was nothing to say. I had waited my whole life to hear those words, and now that they were here, they felt like nothing. Like air. Like the echo of a conversation that should have happened 1,000 times, 1,000 ways, and never did. I'll write it down, he said. Everything. And I'll send it to you. And whatever happens next, I want you to know that I'm proud of you. I've always been proud of you. I just didn't know how to say it. I stood up, the phone still in my hand, the glass wall between us still thick and cold. I looked at my father, at the man who had given everything to a woman who had left him with nothing, and I felt something shift in my chest. Not forgiveness. Not love. Something else. Something that might, in another life, have been the beginning of something new. But not in this life. Not yet. Maybe not ever. I'll be in touch, I said. When I have the statement, I'll start preparing the case. In the meantime, don't talk to anyone. Not the prosecutors, not the guards, not the other inmates. If anyone asks you questions, you tell them to call me. You tell them your lawyer is Alexandra Reyes, and you don't say another word. He nodded, his hand still pressed to the phone, his eyes still on my face. I will. I hung up the phone. I turned and walked out of the visiting room, down the corridor of gray concrete and fluorescent lights, past the guards who watched me with the blink, assessing eyes of men who had seen everything and judged nothing. I walked out of the detention center and into the bright morning light, the sun warm on my face. The city spread out before me like a promise. I got into my car and sat there for a long moment, my hands on the steering wheel, my eyes on the gray building behind me. I had done what I came to do. I had seen my father. I had heard his confession. I had begun the work of saving him. But as I sat there, the engine idling, the city humming around me, I felt something I hadn't expected. I felt empty. Not the emptiness of loss or grief or anger. Something quieter. Something that had been waiting for 7 years to be filled. I thought about my mother. About the way she had looked at my father, even in those final months, with a love that I had never understood. I thought about the lake house, the one that had been in her family for 3 generations, the one that my father had given to Darlene. I thought about the art collection she had spent decades curating, the pieces she had chosen with such care, the paintings and sculptures that had been auctioned off to pay for Darlene's renovations, her trips, her clothes. I thought about the life my mother had built, the life my father had dismantled, the life I was now trying to salvage from the wreckage. I started the car and pulled out of the parking lot, the detention center shrinking in my rearview mirror until it was just a gray smudge on the horizon. I drove back to my office, back to the boxes of documents, back to the work that lay ahead. I had a case to build. A case that would take months of preparation, hours of research, days of testimony. A case that would force me to confront not just my father's crimes, but my own. The crime of letting him go. The crime of pretending I didn't need him. The crime of becoming so good at saving strangers that I had forgotten how to save myself. But that was for later. For now, there was work to do. There was a man in a prison jumpsuit who was waiting for his daughter to save him. And whether I was doing it for him or for myself or for the memory of my mother, I was going to do it. I was going to save him. And when it was over, I would finally be free. The weeks that followed were unlike anything I had ever experienced in my legal career. I had taken on difficult cases before, impossible cases, people called them, the kind that other lawyers walked away from because the odds were too long, the evidence too damning, the clients too desperate. But those cases had been clean. They had been about the law, about the facts, about the truth as it existed in depositions and transcripts and the cold, hard logic of the courtroom. This case was none of those things. This case was a tangle of blood and memory, of old wounds and older betrayals, of a father who had spent his life building empires and a daughter who had spent hers trying to forget him. I threw myself into the work with a ferocity that surprised even me. I was at my office by 6 every morning, the boxes of documents spread across my conference table like the ruins of a city I was trying to rebuild. I worked through lunch, through dinner, through the long hours of the night when the city outside my window was dark and the only light came from the glow of my computer screen. I read depositions and bank statements, loan agreements and property deeds, email chains that stretched back years and phone records that traced the slow, inexorable collapse of a man who had once seemed invincible. I traced the money. I followed the threads. I built a map of my father's empire and watched it crumble on paper, the same way it had crumbled in reality. The story that emerged was not a simple one. It was not the story of a man who set out to defraud his investors, who woke up one morning and decided to steal. It was the story of a man who had been running faster and faster for so long that he had forgotten how to stop. My father had started with nothing. He had built a small real estate company from the ground up, one property at a time, one deal at a time. He had been smart, ambitious, relentless. He had taken risks that paid off, gambles that others wouldn't take. And for a while, it had worked. The money had flowed. The empire had grown. The investors had lined up to give him more. But somewhere along the way, the risks had stopped paying off. The market had turned. The properties that were supposed to be gold mines had become money pits. The investors who were supposed to be patient had started demanding their returns. And my father, who had never learned how to say no, who had never learned how to admit that he had made a mistake, had started borrowing from Peter to pay Paul. He had used new investments to cover old debts. He had created shell companies to hide the losses. He had told himself that it was temporary, that the next deal would save him, that he just needed a little more time. And then Darlene had arrived. I found the evidence of her involvement in the third box, buried under a stack of property deeds and loan agreements. It was a series of email exchanges, dated from the early years of their marriage, between Darlene and a financial advisor in the Cayman Islands. The emails were careful, coded, the language of people who knew they were doing something wrong but had convinced themselves it was just business. They discussed offshore accounts, shell companies, the mechanics of moving money from one place to another without leaving a trace. Darlene was not just a passive beneficiary of my father's fraud. She was an active participant. She was the one who had set up the structure, who had suggested the methods, who had pushed my father to go further than he ever would have gone on his own. I read the emails 3 times, each time feeling a different emotion. The first time, I felt anger. Hot, burning anger at the woman who had come into my father's life and made everything worse. The second time, I felt something closer to pity. Darlene had been young, ambitious, hungry for a life she had never had. She had seen an opportunity and she had taken it. The third time, I felt nothing. Just the cold, clear recognition of the truth. My father had been a fraud long before Darlene arrived. She had just made it easier for him to hide. I called Harold Finch, my father's corporate attorney, and asked him to come to my office. He arrived the next morning, looking older and more tired than he had on the phone. The weeks of waiting, of watching the case unfold, had worn on him. He sat across from me, his hands folded on his lap, his eyes on the stack of papers I had placed on my desk. "I found the emails," I said. "The ones between Darlene and the Cayman advisor." Finch's face tightened. "I was afraid of that." "You knew about them?" "I knew she was involved," he said carefully. "I didn't know how involved. Your father was not forthcoming about her role in the business. He wanted to protect her. Even after everything, even after she left, he wanted to protect her." I leaned back in my chair, the emails spread out before me like evidence in a trial I had already won. He wanted to protect her from what? The truth? The law? Himself. Finch was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was low, almost a whisper. "I think he wanted to protect the idea of her. The woman he thought she was. The woman he wanted her to be. He couldn't admit that she had been using him, that she had been manipulating him, because that would mean admitting that he had been a fool. And your father has never been able to admit that." I thought about my father, sitting in his prison jumpsuit, telling me that Darlene had known everything from the beginning. I thought about the way he had looked at me when he said it, the way his eyes had flickered with something that might have been shame. He had known. He had always known. He had just been too proud to admit it. "I need you to find her," I said. "Darlene. I need to know where she is. I need to know what she's doing. I need to know if she's coming back." Finch shook his head slowly. "She's not coming back. She has the money. She has a new life. She has no reason to return." "She has a reason," I said. "She's a witness. She's a co-conspirator. She's the one who set up the accounts. She's the one who moved the money. If she doesn't come back voluntarily, the prosecution will extradite her. And if they extradite her, she's looking at the same charges my father is facing. Maybe worse." Finch's eyes widened. "You think they'll extradite her?" "I think they'll try," I said. "And I think they'll succeed. Darlene is not as smart as she thinks she is. The Cayman Islands have an extradition treaty with the United States. They've been cooperating with the Justice Department on financial crimes for years. If the prosecutor asks, they'll send her back." I paused, letting the weight of my words settle. "But I don't want the prosecution to find her. I want to find her first. I want to talk to her. I want to know what she's willing to say. And I want to know if she's willing to come back on her own terms before the Justice Department comes for her." Finch stared at me, his face a mixture of surprise and something that might have been admiration. "You want to offer her a deal?" "I want to offer her a choice," I said. "She can come back voluntarily, cooperate with the defense, and testify about her role in the scheme. Or she can wait for the extradition, face the same charges as my father, and spend the next decade of her life in a federal prison. It's her decision. But I need to talk to her before the prosecution does." Finch nodded slowly. "I'll find her. It might take some time, but I'll find her. You have a week, I said. After that, I go to the prosecutor. And if Darlene hasn't made a decision by then, it won't be her choice anymore. He stood up, his movements slow, deliberate. He looked like a man who had just realized that the world he had been living in was not the world he thought it was. I'll find her, he said again. I'll call you when I do. After he left, I sat in my office, the emails still spread out before me, and I thought about Darlene. I had met her only twice. The first time was at my father's wedding, a small ceremony at a hotel in the Bahamas that I had attended out of a sense of obligation that I had mistaken for loyalty. She had been beautiful, of course. She had been young. She had looked at me with the bright, assessing eyes of a woman who was already calculating how to get what she wanted. She had called me sweetheart and told me how much she admired my mother's taste in art, as if she hadn't already begun the process of dismantling everything my mother had built. The second time was at the funeral of a cousin a year later. Darlene had been there, wearing black, looking solemn, but I had seen the impatience in her eyes, the way she kept checking her phone, the way she looked at my father as if he were a possession she had acquired and was already tired of. I had wanted to say something to her, to ask her what she thought she was doing, to tell her that she didn't belong here, that she didn't belong anywhere near my family. But I had said nothing. I had been too polite, too restrained, too afraid of making a scene. I had let her win, the same way I had let my father win, the same way I had let all of them win. I was not going to let her win again. That afternoon, I called Monica Chin, the federal prosecutor. She answered on the first ring, her voice as brisk and professional as ever. Alexandra, she said. I was wondering when you'd call. I have some information you might be interested in, I said. About Darlene Reyes. There was a pause. A pause that told me I had her attention. What kind of information? The kind that suggests she was more involved in the scheme than you thought, I said. The kind that suggests she wasn't just a passive beneficiary. The kind that might make you reconsider your decision not to charge her. Another pause. Longer this time. I could almost hear her thinking, calculating, weighing the risks and rewards of whatever I was about to tell her. I'm listening, she said. I told her about the emails. About the Cayman accounts. About the shell companies Darlene had set up, the transfers she had authorized, the conversations she had had with the financial advisor who had helped her hide the money. I didn't tell her everything. I wasn't going to show my hand until I had to, but I told her enough. Enough to make her curious. Enough to make her wonder. Enough to make her realize that the case she had been building against my father was not as simple as she thought. When I finished, Monica was quiet for a long moment. You've been busy, she said finally. I've been doing my job, I said. The question is whether you've been doing yours. The words hung in the air between us. I had meant them to sting, and they did. I could hear it in her voice when she spoke again. I'll look into it, she said. If what you're saying is true, it changes things. It changes everything, I said. And I want to be there when you talk to her. When you find her. Why? Because I'm the one who found the emails, I said. Because I'm the one who knows the truth about what she did. Because I want to look her in the eye and tell her that her choices have consequences. Monica was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was different. Softer. Almost sympathetic. You know, Alexandra, I've been doing this job for a long time. I've seen a lot of families torn apart by cases like this. A father who steals from his investors. A wife who takes what she can and runs. A daughter who has to decide whether to save him or let him fall. She paused. It's not easy. What you're doing. What you're about to do. I didn't answer. There was nothing to say. She was right. It wasn't easy. It was the hardest thing I had ever done. But it was also the only thing I could do. I'll let you know when we find her, Monica said. And I'll let you be there when we talk. But I'm going to need those emails. The originals. Not copies. They'll be on your desk by morning, I said. I hung up and sat in my office. The city dark now, the lights of the Capitol glowing in the distance. I had done what I set out to do. I had given Monica a reason to look at Darlene. I had given her a reason to question the story she had been telling herself about this case. I had given her a reason to see my father not as the mastermind of a fraud, but as a man who had been manipulated, used, and abandoned by the woman he had trusted. It was not the whole truth. I knew that. My father was not innocent. He had made choices. He had taken risks. He had lied to the people who trusted him. But he had not done it alone. And now, the woman who had helped him do it was going to have to answer for her role. I thought about Darlene. About the life she had built with my father's money, the life she was still living somewhere in the Cayman Islands, spending the millions she had stolen while my father sat in a prison jumpsuit, waiting for his daughter to save him. I thought about the lake house, the art collection, the years of my mother's life that had been sold to pay for Darlene's renovations, her trips, her clothes. I thought about the letter my father had written me, the one that had started all of this. I am not asking you to forgive me. I am not asking you to love me. I am asking you to save my life. I was going to save his life. Not because he deserved it. Not because I forgave him. But because it was the only way to close the circle, to finally, fully, completely own the story of my life. He had taken everything from my mother. He had given it to Darlene. And now, Darlene had taken it from him. The empire was gone. The money was gone. The lake house, the art collection, the life he had built, all of it was gone. But I was still here. I was the only thing left. And I was the only one who could save him. I stood up, walked to the window, and looked out at the city. Somewhere out there, Darlene was living the life she had stolen from my family. Somewhere out there, she was spending the money that should have been mine, that should have been my mother's, that should have been the foundation of a legacy that would have lasted for generations. And somewhere out there, my father was waiting for me to bring her back. I was going to bring her back. I was going to make her answer for what she had done. And when it was over, when the case was closed and the verdict was read, I was going to walk away from all of it. From my father. From Darlene. From the empire that had never been mine. I was going to walk away and finally, for the first time in my life, be free. The call came on a Tuesday, 3 weeks after I had given Harold Finch the deadline to find Darlene. I was in my office, preparing for a deposition in another case, a pro bono matter that I had taken on to remind myself why I had become a lawyer in the first place. The phone rang and Finch's name appeared on the screen. I answered on the first ring. "I found her," he said. His voice was tight, strained, the voice of a man who had been holding his breath for 3 weeks and had just been told he could exhale. "Where?" "Cayman Islands. Grand Cayman. She's been living there since she left. She bought a condo on 7 Mile Beach, the most expensive one on the island. She's been living off the money she took from your father's accounts, spending it like there's no tomorrow." I felt something cold settle in my chest. Does she know we're looking for her? I don't think so. She's been living a very public life. Posting on social media. Going to parties. She doesn't seem to be hiding. She doesn't seem to think anyone is coming for her. I leaned back in my chair, the phone pressed to my ear, my eyes on the window. The city was gray today, the sky heavy with clouds that promised rain. It matched my mood. "She's not going to come back voluntarily," I said. "She has too much to lose. She's going to fight. She's going to hire the best lawyers money can buy. She's going to drag this out for years." Finch was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was lower, more careful. "There's something else. Something you should know." I waited. I found out where some of the money went. Not all of it, she spread it around. Offshore accounts, shell companies, the usual, but enough. Enough to know that she wasn't just spending it on herself. She was sending it to someone. A man. A man she's been seeing for years. Since before she married your father. I closed my eyes. I had known, on some level, that this was coming. I had known that Darlene was not just a gold digger, not just a woman who had married for money. She was something worse. She was a con artist. A woman who had seen my father coming from a mile away, who had known exactly how to play him, who had been running her own scheme while he was running his. "Who is he?" I asked. "His name is Marcus Webb. He's a former stockbroker. Lost his license in a fraud case 10 years ago. He and Darlene go way back. College, I think. They've been working together for years. He was the one who set up the Cayman accounts. He was the one who helped her move the money. He's been living on Grand Cayman with her since she left." I opened my eyes. The sky outside my window was darker now, the clouds lower, the rain about to fall. Do you have proof? Documentation? Something we can use? I have bank records, wire transfers, email chains. Enough to show that she wasn't just a passive beneficiary. Enough to show that she was running a parallel scheme, one that your father knew nothing about. I thought about my father, sitting in his prison jumpsuit, telling me that Darlene had known everything from the beginning. He had been telling the truth. But he hadn't known everything. He hadn't known that she had been playing him from the start, that she had been planning her escape long before the empire started to crumble. He had been a fool. A desperate, lonely, foolish man who had given everything to a woman who had never loved him. I need you to send me everything, I said. Every document, every record, every piece of evidence you have. I'm going to take it to the prosecutor. I'm going to make sure she knows exactly who Darlene is and what she's been doing. Finch hesitated. Are you sure that's the right move? If you go to the prosecutor now, you lose any leverage you have over Darlene. She'll know we're coming for her. She'll have time to prepare. To hide. To run. She's not going to run, I said. She's too comfortable. She's too arrogant. She thinks she got away with it. She thinks no one is coming for her. And I want her to keep thinking that. For now. What are you going to do? I stood up, walked to the window, and looked out at the city. The rain had started to fall, a soft, steady drizzle that blurred the lines between the buildings and the sky. I'm going to let her enjoy her life for a little while longer. I'm going to let her think she's safe. And then, when she least expects it, I'm going to bring her back. Not through extradition. Not through the courts. Through the truth. I hung up before Finch could say anything else. I stood at the window for a long time, watching the rain fall, thinking about Darlene. About the life she was living on 7 Mile Beach, the money she was spending, the man she was with. She thought she had won. She thought she had taken everything from my father and walked away clean. She thought she was safe. She was wrong. That afternoon, I called Monica Chin. She answered on the second ring, her voice as brisk and professional as ever. I have something for you, I said. Something that changes everything. I'm listening. I told her about Darlene. About the man she was with. About the money she had been moving, the accounts she had been hiding, the scheme she had been running while my father was running his. I told her about the emails, the bank records, the wire transfers. I told her about the life Darlene was living on 7 Mile Beach, the life she had bought with money that should have been returned to the investors, the life she was enjoying while my father sat in a detention center, waiting for his daughter to save him. When I finished, Monica was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was different. Softer. Almost reluctant. You know what you're asking me to do, don't you? I'm asking you to do your job, I said. I'm asking you to look at the evidence. I'm asking you to see the truth. Darlene Reyes is not a victim. She's not a bystander. She's a criminal. She's been a criminal for years. And she's been hiding in plain sight, spending money that doesn't belong to her, living a life she didn't earn. Monica sighed. It's not that simple, Alexandra. The case against your father is strong. The evidence is clear. He borrowed money he couldn't repay. He misled investors. He created a house of cards that was always going to fall. Whether Darlene was involved doesn't change what he did. It changes why he did it, I said. It changes who was pulling the strings. It changes the story you're going to tell the jury. And it changes whether my father goes to prison for 20 years or walks free. There was another pause. Longer this time. I could almost hear Monica thinking, weighing the risks and rewards of the path I was proposing. I need to see the evidence, she said finally. The emails. The bank records. The wire transfers. I need to see it all before I make a decision. It's on its way, I said. You'll have it by tomorrow morning. I hung up and sat in my office, the rain still falling outside, the city shrouded in gray. I had done what I set out to do. I had given Monica the evidence she needed to see Darlene for what she was. I had given her a reason to question the story she had been telling herself about this case. I had given her a reason to see my father not as the mastermind of a fraud, but as a man who had been manipulated, used, and abandoned by the woman he had trusted. But as I sat there, the phone still warm in my hand, I felt something I hadn't expected. I felt doubt. Not about Darlene, she was guilty. I knew that with a certainty that went beyond evidence, but about myself. About what I was doing. About who I was becoming. I had spent my whole life trying to be the opposite of my father. He was greedy, I was generous. He was selfish, I was selfless. He built empires, I saved lives. But now, sitting in my office, plotting the destruction of a woman who had wronged my family, I wondered if I was any different. I wondered if the same blood ran through my veins, the same hunger for power, the same need to win at any cost. I thought about my mother. About the way she had looked at my father, even in those final months, with a love that I had never understood. I thought about the life she had built, the life she had lost, the life I was trying to reclaim. I thought about the lake house, the art collection, the years of her life that had been sold to pay for Darlene's renovations, her trips, her clothes. And I thought about Darlene, living on 7 Mile Beach, spending money that should have been mine, that should have been my mother's, that should have been the foundation of a legacy that would have lasted for generations. I was not my father. I was not fighting for money or power or revenge. I was fighting for the truth. For the truth about what Darlene had done. For the truth about what my father had done. For the truth about who I was and who I wanted to be. I picked up the phone again. This time, I dialed the number for the Federal Detention Center. I asked to be connected to my father's unit. A few minutes later, his voice came on the line, thin and tired, the voice of a man who had been waiting for a call that might never come. Alexandra. I found Darlene, I said. She's in the Cayman Islands. She's been living there since she left. She has a new man. She has a new life. She's been spending your money like it's never going to run out. There was a long silence. I could hear my father breathing on the other end of the line, his breath shallow, his chest tight. I could imagine him sitting in his cell, the orange jumpsuit hanging off his thin frame, his eyes closed, his hands clenched. I knew, he said finally. His voice was barely a whisper. I knew she was seeing someone. I just didn't want to admit it. I didn't want to admit that I had been a fool. You were a fool, I said. You gave her everything. Everything my mother worked for. Everything she left to you. Everything that should have been mine. And she took it and ran. He was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was different. Stronger. Clearer. What are you going to do? I'm going to bring her back, I said. I'm going to make her answer for what she did. And when it's over, when the case is closed and the verdict is read, I'm going to walk away. From her. From you. From all of it. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. We both knew what I meant. This was the last time. The last case. The last conversation. When it was over, we would go back to being what we had been for 7 years. Strangers who shared a name. I understand, he said. I don't expect anything more. I never did. I hung up before he could say anything else. I sat in my office, the rain still falling outside, the city still shrouded in gray, and I let the silence settle around me. I had done what I came to do. I had found Darlene. I had given Monica the evidence she needed. I had told my father the truth. And now, all I could do was wait. The next morning, I arrived at my office to find a message from Monica Chen on my voicemail. Her voice was tight, professional, but there was something beneath it, something I hadn't heard before. Excitement. Or maybe anticipation. I've reviewed the evidence, she said. I'd like to meet. My office. 3 o'clock. Come alone. I arrived at the federal courthouse at 10 minutes to 3. The building was a monument to justice, a marble edifice that had witnessed the rise and fall of empires, the triumph and tragedy of a nation. I had been here 100 times, as a defense attorney, as an advocate, as a voice for the voiceless. But this time was different. This time, I was here as a daughter. Monica's office was on the 7th floor, a small, cramped space that was a far cry from the lavish suites of the corporate lawyers who usually handled cases like this. She was sitting behind her desk when I walked in, her laptop open, a stack of files spread out before her. She looked up when I entered, and for a moment, we just looked at each other. Two women who had spent their careers on opposite sides of the courtroom, now sitting on the same side of the table. Sit down, she said, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. I sat. She closed her laptop and folded her hands on top of the files. She looked tired, I realized. The kind of tired that comes from carrying the weight of other people's crimes. "I've been thinking about your father's case," she said. "About Darlene. About the evidence you gave me." I waited. "Here's the thing," she said. "Your father is guilty. I think you know that. He borrowed money he couldn't repay. He misled investors. He created a house of cards that was always going to fall. That's not Darlene's fault. That's his." I nodded. I had known this. I had always known it. "But," she said, and the word hung in the air between us, "Darlene is guilty too. She knew what he was doing. She helped him do it. And when it all started to fall apart, she took what she could and ran. She's not a victim. She's a co-conspirator." She leaned back in her chair, her eyes on mine. "I'm willing to make a deal. Not a good deal. Your father is going to prison. That's not negotiable, but a better deal than he would have gotten without your help. In exchange, I want Darlene. I want her back in this country. I want her on the stand. And I want her to tell the truth about what she did." I felt something shift in my chest. Not relief. Not triumph. Something quieter. Something that had been waiting for this moment for 7 years. "What kind of deal?" I asked. 10 years. Federal prison. He'll serve half with good behavior. He'll forfeit the assets that are left. He'll cooperate with the investigation into Darlene and her partner. And when it's over, he walks away with whatever is left of his life. I thought about my father. About the man who had built an empire and watched it crumble. About the man who had given everything to a woman who had left him with nothing. About the man who was sitting in a prison jumpsuit, waiting for his daughter to save him. "He'll take it," I said. Monica nodded. I thought he might. She reached across the desk and handed me a folder. "The terms are in there. Read them. If he agrees, have him sign. And then we start the process of bringing Darlene back." I took the folder and stood up. I was at the door when Monica spoke again. "Alexandra." I turned. "Your father is lucky to have you. Whether he knows it or not." I looked at her for a long moment. I wanted to tell her that luck had nothing to do with it. That I was not doing this for my father. That I was doing it for myself. For the daughter who had been erased. For the woman who had built a life from nothing. For the lawyer who had never lost a case she believed in. But I didn't say any of that. I just nodded, opened the door, and walked out. The deal took 3 weeks to finalize. 3 weeks of back and forth between my office and Monica Chen's, of phone calls and emails and meetings that stretched late into the night. 3 weeks of my father's lawyers, the ones he had hired before me, the corporate attorneys who had helped him build the empire that was now in ruins, trying to convince me that the deal was too harsh, that he deserved better, that I was betraying my own father by agreeing to let him go to prison. I listened to them politely, nodded at the right moments, and then did what I had decided to do from the beginning. I took the deal. 10 years. Federal prison. Forfeiture of the remaining assets. Full cooperation with the investigation into Darlene and her partner. It was not a good deal. It was not the deal I would have taken for any other client. But for my father, it was the only deal there was. And he knew it. I drove to the detention center on a Friday morning, the folder with the signed agreement tucked into my briefcase. The sky was clear, the sun bright, the kind of day that made you forget that there were men in orange jumpsuits waiting to hear the terms of their future. I was ushered into the same visiting room, the same glass wall, the same guard who pretended not to listen. I sat down and waited. My father appeared a few minutes later. He looked better than he had the last time I saw him. Not younger, the months in detention had aged him in ways that would never reverse, but calmer. More at peace. He had been waiting, I realized. Waiting for me to decide his fate. And now that the waiting was over, he could finally breathe. I picked up the phone on my side of the glass, and he picked up his. "It's done," I said. 10 years. Federal prison. You'll serve half with good behavior. You'll forfeit the assets that are left. And you'll cooperate with the investigation into Darlene and her partner. He nodded slowly, his eyes on my face. I read the terms. Harold sent them to me. "Do you understand what it means? What you're agreeing to?" "I understand," he said. "I'm going to prison." I'm going to lose everything that's left. And I'm going to spend the rest of my life knowing that I was the one who built this empire and the one who destroyed it. I waited. There was more. I could see it in his face, the words he was trying to find. But I'm also going to spend the rest of my life knowing that my daughter saved me, he said. That she did what no one else could do. That she gave me a chance to start again. I looked at him, at this man who had spent his life building empires and watching them fall, and I felt something I hadn't expected. Not love, not forgiveness, but something that might, in another life, have been the beginning of something new. I didn't save you, I said. I gave you a chance to save yourself. What you do with it is up to you. He nodded again, his eyes bright. I know. And I'm going to take it. I'm going to do what you said. Cooperate. Tell the truth. And when I get out, I'm going to find a way to make things right. Not for me. For you. For your mother. For everyone I let down. I didn't say anything. There was nothing to say. He had said these words before 100 times to 100 people. He had said them to my mother in the months before she died. He had said them to the investors when the first checks started to bounce. He had said them to Darlene when she told him she was leaving. Words were easy. What mattered was what came after. The deal goes into effect next week, I said. You'll be transferred to a federal facility in Pennsylvania. It's minimum security. You'll have a job, a routine, a chance to start over. And you'll have a lawyer. Not me. Someone else. Someone who doesn't have a personal stake in the outcome. His face tightened. You're not going to represent me? I was never going to represent you, I said. I told you that from the beginning. I reviewed the case. I found the evidence. I made the deal. But I'm not your lawyer. I'm your daughter. And my job is done. He stared at me for a long moment, his face unreadable. I could see him processing, calculating, trying to find the words that would change my mind. But there were no words. I had made my decision. I was walking away. I understand, he said finally. I don't blame you. I don't have the right. I stood up, the phone still in my hand. I looked at my father, at the man who had given everything to a woman who had left him with nothing, and I felt something I had never felt before. I felt free. Goodbye, Mr. Reyes, I said. I hung up the phone. I turned and walked out of the visiting room, down the corridor of gray concrete and fluorescent lights, past the guards who watched me with the blank, assessing eyes of men who had seen everything and judged nothing. I walked out of the detention center and into the bright morning light, the sun warm on my face, the city spread out before me like a promise. I got into my car and sat there for a long moment, my hands on the steering wheel, my eyes on the gray building behind me. I had done what I came to do. I had saved my father's life. And now I was free. But freedom, I was learning, was not the same as peace. In the weeks that followed, I tried to return to my life. I went back to my office. I took on new cases. I did the work that had always given me purpose, the work of saving strangers who had no one else to turn to. But something was different. The work felt hollow, empty, like a song I had heard 1,000 times and was tired of hearing. I thought about my father, about the man who was now in a federal prison in Pennsylvania, learning to live a life he had never imagined. I thought about the deal I had made, the terms I had accepted, the future I had chosen for him. I thought about Darlene, still living on 7 Mile Beach, still spending the money she had stolen, still thinking she had won. And I thought about myself, about the woman I had become, about the choices I had made, about the life I was living. One night, about a month after my father was transferred, I received a letter. It was from him, written on the thin, cheap paper they sold in the prison commissary. His handwriting was steadier than it had been on the first letter, the one that had started all of this. He was learning to write again, I realized. Learning to live again. The letter was short. He told me about his new routine, the job he had been assigned, the men he was living with. He told me about the books he was reading, the classes he was taking, the plans he was making for the future. He told me about the things he was learning, the things he wished he had known, the things he hoped to teach me someday. And at the end, he wrote something that made me stop. That made me read the words again, and again, and again. I was wrong about you, Alexandra. I was wrong about everything. But mostly, I was wrong about what mattered. I thought it was the money, the empire, the legacy. But it was never any of those things. It was you. It was always you. I folded the letter and put it in the drawer where I kept the things I didn't know what to do with. I sat in my office, the city dark outside my window, and I thought about my mother. About the way she had looked at me, in those final months, with eyes that saw everything and forgave everything. I thought about the lake house, the art collection, the years of her life that had been sold to pay for Darlene's renovations, her trips, her clothes. I thought about the legacy she had left me, the legacy that had nothing to do with money or property or things. The legacy of a woman who had loved without condition, who had given without expectation, who had believed in me when no one else did. I stood up, walked to the window, and looked out at the city. Somewhere out there, Darlene was still living the life she had stolen from my family. Somewhere out there, she was still spending the money that should have been mine, that should have been my mother's, that should have been the foundation of a legacy that would have lasted for generations. And somewhere out there, my father was learning to live a new life, a life that had nothing to do with empires or money or the woman who had betrayed him. I had a choice. I could keep fighting. I could spend the next years of my life hunting Darlene, bringing her back, making her pay for what she had done. Or I could let go. I could walk away. I could choose to live my own life, not the life my father had built or Darlene had stolen or my mother had lost. I thought about the deal I had made, the deal that had saved my father's life and let Darlene walk free. I thought about the woman who was still living on 7 Mile Beach, spending money that didn't belong to her, living a life she didn't earn. I thought about the anger I had carried for so long, the anger that had driven me to become the woman I was, the anger that had given me purpose and taken it away. And I made a decision. The next morning, I called Monica Chin. She answered on the first ring, her voice as brisk and professional as ever. Alexandra, I was wondering when you'd call. I'm not going to pursue Darlene, I said. The deal is done. My father is in prison. The case is closed. I'm moving on. There was a long pause. I could almost hear Monica thinking, processing, trying to understand what I was saying. You're letting her go, she said finally. After everything she did. After everything you did to find her. I'm letting myself go, I said. I've spent my whole life fighting for things that were never mine to fight for. My father's approval. My mother's legacy. The money that was stolen from my family. And it's cost me everything. My peace. My happiness. My life. I paused, the words coming easier than I had expected. I'm done fighting, Monica. I'm done letting the past define me. I'm done being the daughter of William Reyes. I'm done being the woman who lost everything. I'm going to be something new. Something I choose. Something I build for myself. Monica was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was different. Softer. Almost sad. I understand, she said. I don't agree with your decision. But I understand it. I hung up and sat in my office, the sun rising over the city, the light streaming through the window. I had done it. I had let go. And for the first time in as long as I could remember, I felt light. That afternoon, I went to the park near my apartment. It was a small park, a pocket of green in the middle of the city, a place where families brought their children and old men played chess and lovers walked hand in hand. I sat on a bench and watched the world go by. A mother pushing a stroller. A couple arguing about something that didn't matter. A child chasing a pigeon that was smarter than it looked. I thought about my mother. About the way she used to take me to the park when I was little, the way she would push me on the swings and tell me stories about the world. I thought about the life she had wanted for me, the life she had hoped I would have. A life of purpose. A life of meaning. A life of joy. I had spent so long fighting for what was lost that I had forgotten to live. I had spent so long being the daughter of William Reyes that I had forgotten who I was without him. I had spent so long carrying the weight of my family's sins that I had forgotten how to put them down. I sat on that bench for a long time, watching the sun move across the sky, the shadows lengthen, the city slow to the rhythm of evening. And when I finally stood up to go home, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. The weeks that followed were different. I went back to my office, but I didn't stay late. I took on new cases, but I didn't let them consume me. I started saying no to the things that didn't matter and yes to the things that did. I started cooking again, something I hadn't done since my mother died. I started calling old friends, the ones I had lost touch with when I buried myself in work. I started living. And slowly, almost without noticing, I started to heal. The letters from my father kept coming. One a week, every week, written on the same thin paper, in the same steady hand. He told me about the classes he was taking, the books he was reading, the men he was living with. He told me about the things he was learning, the things he wished he had known, the things he hoped to teach me someday. He never asked for forgiveness. He never asked for love. He just wrote. I read every letter. I kept them in the drawer with the first one, the one that had started all of this. I didn't write back. Not yet. I wasn't ready. But I read them. And each week, when the letter came, I felt a little lighter, a little freer, a little more like myself. One afternoon, about 6 months after my father was transferred, I received a package in the mail. It was small, wrapped in brown paper, with no return address. I opened it in my office, the afternoon light streaming through the window, the city humming below. Inside was a photograph. It was old, faded, the colors soft with age. It was a picture of my mother and father, taken before I was born, when they were young and in love. They were standing in front of the lake house, my mother's hand in my father's, their faces turned toward the sun. They looked happy. They looked hopeful. They looked like a family that had everything to live for. I held the photograph for a long time, my eyes on my mother's face, the face I had been trying to remember for so long. And I thought about the life she had wanted for me, the life she had hoped I would have. A life of purpose. A life of meaning. A life of joy. I placed the photograph on my desk, next to the picture of me at graduation, the one my mother had taken on the last day she was strong enough to hold a camera. I looked at the two images, side by side, and I saw the arc of a life. The life my mother had lived. The life I was living. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I had been dialing every week for 6 months, a number I had never let ring. This time, I let it ring. A voice answered. A voice I knew. A voice that was older now, thinner, but still the voice of the man who had taught me to ride a bike, who had read me stories before bed, who had held my hand at my mother's funeral. Alexandra. Dad, I said. And for the first time in 7 years, it didn't feel like a word I had borrowed from someone else's life. It felt like my own. The call that changed everything came on a Thursday afternoon, 3 months after I had made my peace with letting Darlene go. I was in my office, reviewing a case file for a client I had taken on pro bono, a young woman who had been charged with a crime she didn't commit. It was the kind of case I had built my career on, the kind that reminded me why I had become a lawyer in the first place. The phone rang, and the name on the screen was one I hadn't seen in months. Harold Finch. I answered on the second ring. Harold. I wasn't expecting to hear from you. His voice was tight, strained, the voice of a man who had been holding onto a secret for too long. I need to see you. It's about Darlene. I leaned back in my chair, my eyes on the window. The sky was clear, the sun bright, the kind of day that made you forget that there were people in the world who could destroy everything you loved. I told you, Harold. I'm done with Darlene. The deal is done. My father is in prison. I've moved on. I know, he said. But there's something you need to know. Something I found. Something that changes everything. I waited. There was a weight in his voice, a gravity that I hadn't heard before. He was not a man who exaggerated. He was not a man who called with news that didn't matter. Come to my office, he said. I'll show you what I found. And then you can decide whether you're really done. I hung up and sat for a long moment, the phone still warm in my hand. I had told myself that I was done. I had told myself that I was moving on. I had told myself that Darlene was in the past, that the money was gone, that the only thing that mattered was the future I was building for myself. But Harold's call had stirred something I thought I had buried. Something that had been waiting, patient, for a reason to wake up. I drove to Finch's office, a high-rise in the financial district, the kind of building my father had once owned. The lobby was marble and chrome, the elevators fast and silent, the hallways lined with the names of companies that had been bought and sold a dozen times. Finch's office was on the 27th floor, a corner suite with a view of the city that stretched to the horizon. He was waiting for me when I arrived, his face pale, his hands trembling slightly. "Sit down," he said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. I sat. He didn't. He walked to the window, his back to me, his hands clasped behind him. For a long moment, he just stood there, looking out at the city, the sunlight catching the silver in his hair. "I found something," he said finally. "Something I should have found a long time ago. Something that would have changed everything." I waited. "The money," he said. "The money Darlene took. The $3.7 million. I traced it. Every account, every transfer, every shell company she used to hide it. I thought I knew where it went. I thought she was spending it, living on it, using it to build a new life with her boyfriend. But I was wrong." He turned to face me, and I saw something in his eyes that I had never seen before. Shame. "The money didn't go to Darlene," he said. "It went to your father." I stared at him. The words didn't make sense. They couldn't make sense. My father had told me that Darlene had taken the money. He had told me that she had cleaned out the accounts and run. He had written it in his letter. He had said it in the visiting room, his voice thick with betrayal, his eyes wet with tears. "That's not possible," I said. "I saw the emails, the bank records, the wire transfers. She was the one who set up the accounts. She was the one who moved the money." "She set up the accounts," Finch said. "She moved the money. But it wasn't for her. It was for him. He was the one who told her to do it. He was the one who planned the whole thing. The Cayman accounts. The shell companies. The money that was supposed to look like it was stolen. It was all his idea." I felt the room tilt. The walls, the windows, the city outside, all of it seemed to shift, to slide, to become something I didn't recognize. I had spent months building a case against Darlene. Months convincing myself that she was the villain, that she had stolen from my father, that she had destroyed my family. And now Finch was telling me that it was all a lie, that my father had been the one pulling the strings, that he had used Darlene as a decoy, a scapegoat, a woman he could blame for everything he had done. "How do you know?" I asked. My voice was barely a whisper. Finch walked to his desk and picked up a folder. He handed it to me. Inside were documents, bank statements, wire transfers, emails. I flipped through them, my eyes scanning the pages, my mind refusing to process what I was seeing. There it was. The money. $3.7 million. Transferred from Darlene's account to an account in my father's name. An account that was supposed to have been frozen by the FBI. An account that my father had hidden, that he had lied about, that he had used to fund a life that didn't exist. He was planning to run, Finch said. He was going to take the money and disappear. Leave Darlene to take the fall. Leave you to clean up the mess. But the FBI moved faster than he expected. They froze his accounts before he could get to the money. They arrested him before he could leave the country. And Darlene was left holding the bag. I closed the folder. My hands were shaking. I looked at Finch, at this man who had worked for my father for 30 years, who had helped him build the empire that was now in ruins, who had known the truth and said nothing. "You knew," I said. "You knew what he was planning. You knew he was going to run. You knew he was going to let Darlene take the blame. And you let me build a case against her. You let me convince myself that she was the villain. You let me save him." Finch's face was gray. "I didn't know," he said. "Not at first. I thought he was telling the truth. I thought she had taken the money. I thought she had betrayed him. It wasn't until I started digging, after he was transferred, after the deal was done, that I found the real accounts. The ones he had hidden. The ones he had been planning to use." I stood up. I couldn't sit anymore. I couldn't breathe. The room was too small, the air too thin, the weight of what I had learned pressing down on me like a physical force. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked. "Why didn't you tell me before?" Finch's eyes met mine. "Because I didn't know. And because you deserve to know the truth. About your father. About Darlene. About the case you built. About the deal you made." I stared at him for a long moment. I wanted to be angry. I wanted to scream, to cry, to throw the folder at his head. But I couldn't. I was too tired. Too empty. Too broken by the weight of everything I had learned. Where is she? I asked. Darlene. Where is she now? Finch shook his head. I don't know. She disappeared after the money was frozen. She knew, I think. She knew that your father had set her up. She knew that the money was gone. She knew that she was the one who was going to take the fall. So she ran. And no one has seen her since. I thought about Darlene. The woman I had spent months hunting, months blaming, months trying to destroy. She was not the villain I had made her out to be. She was a pawn. A woman who had been used by my father, the same way he had used everyone. The same way he had used me. I walked to the window and looked out at the city. The sun was setting now, the sky streaked with red and gold, the buildings casting long shadows across the streets. Somewhere out there, Darlene was hiding. Running. Trying to survive. And somewhere out there, my father was sitting in a federal prison, waiting for his daughter to visit, waiting for the chance to tell her the truth. I turned back to Finch. I need to see him, I said. I need to hear it from him. I need to know why he did it. Why he lied. Why he let me believe that Darlene was the one who destroyed our family. Finch nodded slowly. I'll arrange it. A visit. Private. No. Guards. Just you and him. You deserve that much. I picked up the folder and walked to the door. I was halfway out when Finch spoke again. Alexandra. I turned. I'm sorry, he said. I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner. I'm sorry I let you believe a lie. I'm sorry for everything. I looked at him for a long moment. I wanted to tell him that it wasn't his fault. That he had been as much a victim of my father's lies as I was. That the only person who deserved blame was the man who had spent his life building empires on the backs of the people who trusted him. But I didn't say any of that. I just nodded, opened the door, and walked out. I drove home in a daze, the folder on the passenger seat, the city lights blurring past my window. I didn't see the streets I was driving on. I didn't see the cars, the people, the buildings. I saw my father. I saw his face in the visiting room, the way he had looked at me when I told him about the deal, the way he had said my name. I saw the letters he had written, the words he had used, the promises he had made. And I saw Darlene, the woman I had blamed for everything, the woman who had been running from my father's lies for years. I pulled into my parking garage and sat in the car for a long time, the engine off, the silence pressing in on me. I thought about the call I had made to my father, the first call in 7 years, the call that had felt like a beginning. I thought about the words I had said, Dad, and the words he had said back, Alexandra. I thought about the hope I had felt, the hope that maybe, just maybe, we could find a way back to each other. And I thought about the truth I had just learned. The truth that made that hope a lie. I picked up the folder and carried it into my apartment. I poured myself a glass of wine, the same wine I had poured on the night I received my father's first letter, and I sat down at my desk. I opened the folder and read every document again. The bank statements. The wire transfers. The emails. I read them until the words blurred, until the dates and numbers lost their meaning, until I couldn't see anything but the truth. My father had planned it all. The fraud. The accounts. The money. He had used Darlene as a shield, a woman he could blame when the empire started to crumble. He had let me believe that she was the villain. He had let me build a case against her. He had let me save him, knowing that I was saving a lie. I closed the folder and sat in the dark, the city lights flickering through my window, the wine glass empty beside me. I had spent my whole life trying to be the opposite of my father. I had built a career on truth, on justice, on saving the people who had no one else. And now I knew that I had been just as much a fool as Darlene. Just as much a pawn. Just as much a victim of the man who had spent his life building empires on the backs of the people who loved him. The next morning, I called the federal prison in Pennsylvania. I asked to be put on the visitor list. I told them I needed to see my father. I told them it was urgent. They gave me an appointment for the following week. A Tuesday, 10 in the morning. 2 hours. No guards. Just him and me. I spent the week preparing. Not for a legal argument. Not for a negotiation. For the conversation I had been avoiding for 7 years. The conversation about who he was, who I was, and what we had done to each other. I wrote down everything I wanted to say. The questions I needed to ask. The truths I needed to hear. I filled pages with words I had been holding inside for a lifetime. And then, on the night before the visit, I threw them all away. I didn't need a script. I didn't need to rehearse. I needed to look at my father and see the truth. And then I needed to decide what kind of daughter I wanted to be. I drove to the prison on a Tuesday morning, the sky gray, the roads empty, the world quiet. The prison was a low-slung building of concrete and razor wire, the same as the detention center where I had first visited him, but different. This was not a place for men who were waiting. This was a place for men who had been judged. I was led through a series of doors, each one locking behind me, each one taking me deeper into the world where my father now lived. And then I was in a room. A small room with a table and 2 chairs and a window that looked out onto a yard of dead grass and bare trees. I sat down and waited. The door opened and my father walked in. He looked different than he had in the detention center. Older, yes, but also calmer. More settled. The prison uniform was the same orange, but it fit him differently. It was no longer a costume. It was a uniform. The uniform of a man who had accepted his fate. He sat down across from me, his hands on the table, his eyes on my face. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. We just looked at each other, father and daughter, separated by a lifetime of lies and a table that might as well have been a continent. "You know," he said finally. It wasn't a question. "I know," I said. He nodded slowly. "Harold told you." Harold showed me the evidence. The accounts. The transfers. The emails. The plan you made to run. To let Darlene take the fall. To let me save you from a crime you committed. He closed his eyes. His face, which had been calm, was now a mask of something I had never seen before. Grief. Real, genuine, human grief. "I was going to tell you," he said. "After the deal was done. After I was safe. I was going to tell you everything." "When?" I asked. "When were you going to tell me?" "After I spent months building a case against an innocent woman? After I convinced myself that she was the villain? After I let you convince me that you were the victim?" He opened his eyes. They were wet. "I was a coward," he said. "I was a coward then, and I'm a coward now. I thought I could run. I thought I could hide. I thought I could let Darlene take the blame and start a new life somewhere else. But I couldn't. I was too weak. Too scared. Too afraid of what I had become." I looked at him, at this man who had spent his life building empires and watching them fall, and I felt something I hadn't expected. I felt pity. Not for the man who had lied to me, who had used me, who had let me believe a lie. But for the man who was sitting in a prison jumpsuit, finally, after a lifetime of running, telling the truth. "Why did you do it?" I asked. "Why did you let me believe that Darlene was the one who destroyed our family? Why did you let me spend months of my life building a case against her? Why did you let me save you from a crime you committed?" He was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. "Because I was afraid," he said. "I was afraid of losing you. I was afraid that if you knew the truth, you would walk away. I was afraid that I would spend the rest of my life alone. And I was right. I was right about everything. I am alone. I have always been alone. And I deserve it." I stared at him. The words I had been holding inside for a week, for a lifetime, were gone. There was nothing left to say. He knew what he had done. He knew why he had done it. He knew that there were no words that could undo it. I stood up. I walked to the door. I was halfway there when he spoke again. "Alexandra." I stopped. I didn't turn around. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness," he said. "I know I don't deserve your love. But I want you to know that I'm sorry. I'm sorry for everything. For your mother. For Darlene. For you. I spent my whole life building things that didn't matter. And I lost the only thing that did." I stood there for a long moment, my hand on the door, my back to him. I thought about the letters he had written, the words he had said, the promises he had made. I thought about the man who had taught me to ride a bike, who had read me stories before bed, who had held my hand at my mother's funeral. And I thought about the man who had lied to me, who had used me, who had let me believe a lie. I turned around. I looked at him, at this man who had spent his life running from the truth, and I saw something I had never seen before. I saw myself. "I don't know if I can forgive you," I said. "I don't know if I can ever trust you again. But I know that I don't want to spend the rest of my life running from who I am. And I know that I don't want to be alone." I walked back to the table and sat down. I looked at my father, at the man who had given everything to a woman who had left him with nothing, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. I felt hope. The months that followed my visit to the prison were unlike anything I had experienced before. I had spent my entire adult life running from my father, from my past, from the truth about who I was and where I came from. But now, for the first time, I was standing still. I was allowing myself to feel the weight of everything I had learned, everything I had lost, everything I had yet to become. It was not an easy process. There were days when the anger returned, hot and sharp, and I wanted to drive back to the prison and scream at my father until my voice gave out. There were days when the grief was so heavy I could barely get out of bed, when the memory of my mother's face, the sound of her laugh, the way she used to hum while she cooked, all of it would wash over me like a wave and leave me gasping for air. And there were days when I felt nothing at all, just a vast, empty silence where my heart used to be. I started seeing a therapist, a woman named Dr. Evelyn Park, who specialized in family trauma and had a quiet, steady presence that made it easier to say the things I had been holding inside for 30 years. I told her about my mother, about the way she had faded in those final months, about the guilt I still carried for not being there more, for not saying the words that mattered. I told her about my father, about the empire he had built and the lies he had told, about the letter that had started all of this and the truth that had ended it. I told her about Darlene, about the woman I had blamed for everything, about the woman who had been just as much a victim as I was. And I told her about myself, about the choices I had made, the life I had built, the person I had become. I told her about the cases I had won, the clients I had saved, the reputation I had built as a woman who never lost. And I told her about the emptiness I had felt, even at the height of my success, the sense that I was running from something I could never outrun. "You spent your whole life trying to be the opposite of your father," Dr. Park said one afternoon, her voice soft, her eyes kind. "You built a career on truth, on justice, on saving people who had no one else. But in doing so, you lost something essential. You lost yourself." I looked at her, at this woman who had spent years helping people untangle the knots of their past, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. I felt seen. "What do I do now?" I asked. "How do I find myself again?" She smiled. "You start by forgiving yourself. For the choices you made. For the things you didn't know. For the lies you believed. You were a daughter trying to survive. You did what you had to do. And now you have the chance to do something different. To be something different. To build a life that is yours, not a reaction to anyone else's." I left her office that day with a weight lifted from my shoulders. Not the weight of my father's lies, that would take years to unpack, but the weight of my own expectations. I had spent my whole life trying to be perfect, trying to be the daughter my mother would have been proud of, the lawyer my father could never be. And in doing so, I had forgotten how to be human. I started making changes. Small ones at first. I cleared my calendar for the first weekend in months and drove to the lake house. Not the one my father had sold, that was gone. A condominium complex now, the land paved over, the trees cut down, the memories buried. But there was another lake, a smaller one, an hour north of the city, where my mother used to take me when I was little. I hadn't been there in 20 years. I wasn't sure it would still be there. It was. The lake was smaller than I remembered, the trees thicker, the paths overgrown, but the water was the same clear blue, the same soft ripple of wind across the surface. I sat on the shore, my shoes off, my feet in the water, and I let myself remember. The summer my mother taught me to swim, the way she held me in the water, her arms steady, her voice calm. The picnics we used to have, the sandwiches she made, the way she always saved the last cookie for me. The stories she told, the ones about the lake, about the family who had lived here before us, about the woman who had loved this place so much she had asked to be buried here. I sat there until the sun set, until the stars came out, until the water was dark and the only light was the soft glow of the moon. And when I finally stood up to go home, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. The letters from my father kept coming. One a week, every week, written on the same thin paper, in the same steady hand. But the tone was different now. He was not asking for forgiveness. He was not asking for love. He was just writing. Telling me about his life, his classes, his work. Telling me about the things he was learning, the things he wished he had known, the things he hoped to teach me someday. And at the end of each letter, the same words, I am here. Whenever you are ready. I didn't write back. Not yet. I wasn't ready. But I read every letter. And each week, when the letter came, I felt a little lighter. A little freer. A little more like the daughter I wanted to be. The case that had consumed my life for so long was finally winding down. My father's deal had been finalized. He was serving his time. The assets that remained had been forfeited. The investors, those who had not already given up hope, had received a fraction of what they were owed. It was not justice. It was not closure. But it was over. I thought about Darlene often. About the woman I had blamed for everything. The woman who had been running from my father's lies for years. I had tried to find her in those first weeks after Finch told me the truth. I had hired a private investigator, a former FBI agent who specialized in tracking down people who didn't want to be found. He had searched for months, following leads that went nowhere, chasing shadows that disappeared into the night. In the end, he had found nothing. Darlene was gone. Disappeared. Erased. I thought about what I would say to her if I ever found her. I had imagined the conversation 100 times, 1,000 times. In some versions, I apologized. In others, I asked for forgiveness. In most, I just sat with her, two women who had been used by the same man, and let the silence say what words could not. But she was gone. And I had to let her go. One afternoon, about 6 months after my visit to the prison, I received a letter that was not from my father. It was from a woman I had never met, a woman named Maria Santos who had been my mother's closest friend. I had not seen Maria since the funeral. She had sent a card, a short note expressing her condolences, and then she had faded from my life, the same way everyone had faded after my mother died. The letter was short, written in a careful, elegant hand. Dear Alexandra, I hope this letter finds you well. I have been following your career from afar, reading about the cases you have won, the lives you have saved. Your mother would have been so proud. I am writing to you because I have something that belongs to you. Something your mother left for you, many years ago. She asked me to hold on to it until you were ready. I think, perhaps, that time has come. Please call me. I would like to see you. I would like to tell you about your mother. About the woman she was, before the illness, before the grief. About the things she wanted you to know. With love, Maria. I read the letter 3 times, each time feeling something different. The first time, I felt confusion. What could my mother have left for me? The estate had been settled years ago. The lake house was gone. The art collection was gone. The money was gone. The second time, I felt anger. Why had Maria waited so long? Why had she let me believe that my mother's legacy was lost? The third time, I felt something else. Something softer. Something that might have been hope. I called the number at the bottom of the letter. Maria answered on the second ring, her voice warm, familiar, the voice of a woman who had been waiting for this call for a very long time. Alexandra, she said. I was hoping you would call. Maria, I said. I don't understand. What did my mother leave for me? Maria was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was different. Softer. Your mother was a woman who believed in the future, even when she knew she wouldn't be there to see it. She spent the last months of her life putting together something for you. Something she wanted you to have. Something she hoped would help you find your way. I felt the tears coming, the ones I had been holding back for years. What is it? She wrote you letters, Maria said. Dozens of them. Letters for every occasion. Your graduation. Your first big case. Your wedding, if you ever decide to have one. The birth of your children, if you decide to have them. She wrote letters for the days she knew would be hard, and letters for the days she hoped would be happy. She wanted you to know that she was with you, even when she couldn't be. I closed my eyes. I could see my mother, sitting in her chair by the window, her hands thin, her face pale, her eyes bright with a love that had never faded. I could see her writing, the pen moving across the page, the words she was leaving behind for a daughter she would never see grow up. "Why now?" I asked. "Why did you wait so long?" Maria sighed. "Your mother asked me to wait. She said you would know when you were ready. She said you would find your way to them when the time was right. And I trusted her. I trusted that she knew you better than anyone." I opened my eyes. The room was blurry with tears. "Can I see them? The letters?" "Of course," Maria said. "Come to my house. Tomorrow. I'll make tea. I'll tell you about your mother. And I'll give you the gift she left for you." I hung up and sat in my office, the city dark outside my window, the weight of the years pressing down on me. My mother had been gone for so long. I had tried to hold on to her in those first years, but the memories had faded, the sound of her voice growing dim, the shape of her face becoming a blur. I had told myself that it was okay, that she was at peace, that she would want me to move on. But I had been lying. I had been holding onto the grief because it was the only thing I had left of her. And now I had something else. Her words. Her love. Her hope for a future she would never see. I drove to Maria's house the next morning, a small cottage in the suburbs, surrounded by gardens that had been tended for decades. Maria was waiting for me on the porch, her hair gray now, her face lined with age, but her eyes the same warm brown I remembered from my childhood. She hugged me, a long, tight hug, the kind of hug that said more than words ever could. "I've missed you," she said. "I've missed your mother. Every day." We went inside. The house was small, cluttered, filled with the artifacts of a life well lived. Photographs on the walls, books on the shelves, the smell of tea and flowers, and something that might have been hope. Maria led me to the kitchen, where a pot of tea was waiting, and we sat at the table, two women who had loved the same woman, and we talked. She told me about my mother, about the woman she had been before the illness, before the grief, about the way she had laughed, the way she had danced, the way she had loved without reservation. She told me about the summer my parents met, the way my father had pursued my mother, the way she had resisted, the way she had finally, reluctantly, given in. She told me about the early years of their marriage, the hope they had shared, the dreams they had built. And she told me about the slow, steady erosion of that hope, the way my father's ambition had consumed him, the way my mother had watched the man she loved disappear into a man she didn't recognize. "She loved you," Maria said, her voice thick with tears. "She loved you more than anything in this world. And she was so proud of you. The woman you became. The life you built. The person you are." I wiped my eyes. I wish I had been there more. At the end. I wish I had said the things that mattered. Maria reached across the table and took my hand. She knew. She always knew. You were the light of her life. And she wanted you to know that. She wanted you to carry that with you always. She stood up and walked to a small desk in the corner of the room. She opened a drawer and pulled out a box. It was a wooden box, simple, unadorned, the kind of box that held things that mattered. She placed it on the table in front of me. "These are for you," she said. "Your mother's letters. Every one of them. She wrote them in the months before she died. She wanted you to have them. She wanted you to know that she was with you always." I opened the box. Inside were dozens of envelopes, each one addressed in my mother's handwriting, each one marked with a date or an occasion. For Alexandra's graduation. For her first day of law school. For her first big case. For her wedding day. For the birth of her first child. For the days when she needs to remember that she is loved. I picked up the first envelope, the one marked for the day she needs to remember, and I opened it. The paper was yellowed with age, the ink faded, but the words were clear. My mother's words. The words she had left for me. "My dearest Alexandra, if you are reading this, then you are having a day. The kind of day that makes you wonder if you are strong enough, brave enough, good enough. And I want you to know that you are. You have always been. I remember the day you were born. The way you looked at me, your eyes wide, your hands grasping, as if you were trying to hold onto the world before it slipped away. And I knew in that moment that you were going to be extraordinary. Not because of anything you would do, or become, or achieve, but because of who you were, who you have always been. I am not there with you. I wish I was. I wish I could hold your hand, wipe your tears, tell you that everything is going to be okay. But I can't. So I am writing this instead. I am writing this to remind you that you are loved, that you have always been loved, that no matter what happens, no matter how hard the days get, you are never alone. I believe in you, Alexandra. I always have. And I always will. With all my love, Mom. I read the letter 3 times. The first time I wept. The second time I smiled. The third time, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. I felt my mother's presence. Not as a memory, not as a ghost, but as a living, breathing part of me. The part that had always been there, waiting for me to find it. I looked up at Maria, who was watching me with tears in her eyes. She loved you, Maria said again. She loved you so much. I nodded. I know. I've always known. I put the letter back in the envelope, placed it carefully in the box, and stood up. I had so much to do. So much to learn. So much to become. But for the first time in as long as I could remember, I knew that I was ready. The letters from my mother became my anchor in the months that followed. I read them slowly, deliberately, one at a time, savoring each word, each sentence, each memory she had left behind. There were letters for my birthdays, each one marked with the age I was turning, each one filled with stories about the girl I had been and the woman she hoped I would become. There were letters for the milestones she had missed, my first day of law school, my first big case, my first solo argument before a judge. There were letters for the days she knew would be hard, the days when I would need to be reminded that I was strong enough, brave enough, good enough. And there were letters for the days she hoped would be happy, the days she dreamed of celebrating with me, even though she knew she wouldn't be there. I read them in the quiet hours of the morning, before the city woke up, before the demands of my work consumed me. I read them in the evenings, after the cases were closed and the clients were gone, when the only light in my office came from the glow of my computer screen. I read them on the weekends, sitting on the shore of the lake where she had taught me to swim, the water dark and still, the trees whispering in the wind. And with each letter, I felt myself healing. Not the quick, sharp healing of a wound that has been stitched closed, but the slow, steady healing of a life that has been broken and is being rebuilt. One letter, in particular, stayed with me. It was marked for the day you forgive your father. I had stared at the envelope for a long time before I opened it, my hands trembling, my heart pounding. I had not forgiven my father. I did not know if I ever could. But I opened the letter anyway, because my mother had written it for me, and I owed her the chance to say what she needed to say. My dearest Alexandra, if you are reading this, then you have reached a place I never could. A place of forgiveness. A place of peace. And I want you to know that I am proud of you. Prouder than I have ever been of anything. Your father was not an easy man. He was driven, ambitious, consumed by a need to prove himself that I never fully understood. He loved me in his way. He loved you in his way. But his love was always tangled up in his ambition, in his need to be more, to have more, to be seen as more. And in the end, that ambition cost him everything. His family, his freedom, his soul. I never forgave him. I wanted to. I tried to. But I couldn't let go of the anger, the hurt, the sense of betrayal that had been building for years. And I carried that weight with me to the end. I don't want that for you. I don't want you to carry the same weight, to spend your life running from a man who is running from himself. Forgiveness is not about forgetting. It is not about excusing. It is about letting go. It is about freeing yourself from the chains of the past. It is about choosing to live your life, not in reaction to someone else's choices, but in response to your own. I hope, when you read this, that you have found that freedom. I hope that you have let go of the anger, the hurt, the weight of the years. I hope that you have found a way to love your father, not for who he was, but for who he might become. And I hope that you have found a way to love yourself, for who you are and who you are becoming. With all my love, "Mom," I folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope. I sat in my office, the city dark outside my window, the weight of my mother's words settling into my bones. She had never forgiven him. She had carried that weight to the end. And now she was asking me to let it go, to free myself from the chains of the past, to choose my own life, not in reaction to my father's choices, but in response to my own. I thought about the last time I had seen my father, in the prison visiting room, the way he had looked at me when I told him I didn't know if I could forgive him. I thought about the letters he had written, the words he had said, the promises he had made. I thought about the man he had been, and the man he was trying to become. And I made a decision. The next morning, I called the prison. I asked to be put on the visitor list. I told them I needed to see my father. I told them it was time. They gave me an appointment for the following week. A Thursday. 2 in the afternoon. 2 hours. No guards. Just him and me. I spent the week preparing. Not for a confrontation. Not for a reconciliation. For a conversation. The conversation I had been avoiding for 30 years. The conversation about who we were, who we had been, and who we wanted to become. I drove to the prison on a Thursday afternoon, the sky gray, the roads empty, the world quiet. The prison was the same low-slung building of concrete and razor wire, the same series of doors that locked behind me, the same yard of dead grass and bare trees. But this time, I was not afraid. I was not angry. I was something else. Something that might have been hope. I was led to the same small room, the same table and chairs, the same window looking out onto the yard. I sat down and waited. The door opened and my father walked in. He looked older than he had the last time I saw him. The months in prison had changed him. Not just in the way his hair had thinned, his face had lined, his body had shrunk, but in the way he carried himself. The way he walked. The way he looked at me. He was no longer the man who had built empires and watched them crumble. He was a man who was learning to live with what he had done. He sat down across from me, his hands on the table, his eyes on my face. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. We just looked at each other, father and daughter, separated by a lifetime of lies and a table that might as well have been a continent. "I've been reading Mom's letters," I said finally. "The ones she left for me. The ones Maria kept all these years." His face tightened. "I didn't know she wrote letters. She never told me." "She wrote them at the end," I said. "When she knew she was dying. She wrote them for me. For the days she knew would be hard. For the days she hoped would be happy. And for the day I forgave you." He closed his eyes. His hands, which had been steady, were trembling now. "I don't deserve your forgiveness. I never did." "That's not for you to decide," I said. "Forgiveness isn't about what you deserve. It's about what I need. What I need to let go. What I need to move on." He opened his eyes. They were wet. "What do you need, Alexandra? What do you need from me?" I looked at him, at this man who had spent his life running from the truth, and I saw something I had never seen before. I saw a man who was ready to stop running. "I need you to tell me the truth," I said. "All of it. Not the version you told yourself. Not the version you told the lawyers. The truth. About the money. About Darlene. About Mom. About everything." He nodded slowly. His hands were still trembling, but his voice, when he spoke, was steady. "I was a fraud," he said. "Not just with the money. With everything. I pretended to be a man I wasn't. I pretended to have a life I didn't. I pretended to love a woman I couldn't." He paused, his eyes on the table, his voice low. "I loved your mother. I did. But I didn't know how to love her the way she needed to be loved. I didn't know how to be the man she deserved. So I built an empire instead. I built something I could control. Something that would make me feel like I was worth something. Like I was someone." He looked up at me, his eyes bright with tears. "And when it all started to fall apart, I did what I had always done. I ran. I blamed Darlene. I blamed the market. I blamed everyone but myself. And I let you believe that she was the one who destroyed our family. Because it was easier than admitting that I had done it myself. I listened. I didn't interrupt. I didn't judge. I just listened." "I was going to run," he said. "After the FBI started investigating. After the investors started calling. I was going to take the money and disappear. Start a new life somewhere else. Somewhere no one knew who I was or what I had done. And I was going to let Darlene take the fall. Let you take the fall. Let everyone who had ever trusted me take the fall. He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. But I couldn't do it. I couldn't leave you. I couldn't leave your mother's memory. I couldn't leave the life we had built, even though I had destroyed it. So I stayed. I stayed and I let them arrest me. I stayed and I let you save me. I stayed and I let you believe that I was the victim. He was crying now, openly, the tears streaming down his face, his voice breaking. I'm sorry, Alexandra. I'm so sorry. For everything. For your mother. For Darlene. For you. I spent my whole life building things that didn't matter. And I lost the only thing that did. I reached across the table and took his hand. It was thin, cold, trembling. But it was the hand of my father. The man who had taught me to ride a bike. Who had read me stories before bed. Who had held my hand at my mother's funeral. I know, I said. I know you're sorry. I know you wish things had been different. I know you wish you had been different. But wishing doesn't change anything. What matters is what you do now. What you do with the time you have left. He looked at me, his eyes red, his face wet. What can I do? I'm in prison. I have nothing. I am nothing. You're my father, I said. That's something. That's everything. And what you can do is be honest. With yourself. With me. With the people you hurt. You can spend the rest of your life trying to be the man you should have been. The man Mom believed you could be. The man I'm still hoping you can become. He stared at me for a long moment. I could see him processing, calculating, trying to find the words that would make this right. But there were no words. There was only the truth. And the truth was that he had spent his life running, and now, for the first time, he had to stop. I'll try, he said finally. I don't know if I can do it. I don't know if I can be the man you want me to be. But I'll try. I squeezed his hand. That's all I ask. We sat there for a long time, father and daughter, hands clasped across the table, the silence between us no longer a wall but a bridge. And for the first time in as long as I could remember, I felt like we were building something. Not an empire. Not a legacy. Something smaller. Something more fragile. Something that might, if we were lucky, become a family. The visit ended too soon. A guard appeared at the door, his face impassive, his voice flat. Time's up. My father stood. He looked at me, his eyes still wet, his face raw with emotion. Will you come back? I stood too. I looked at him, at this man who had spent his life running from the truth, and I saw something I had never seen before. I saw a man who was trying. A man who was, finally, after a lifetime of running, standing still. I'll come back, I said. Not because I forgive you. Not because I trust you. But because you're my father. And I want to see who you become. He nodded. A single tear slipped down his cheek. He wiped it away quickly, the gesture of a man who had spent his life hiding his tears. But this time, he didn't hide. He let me see. And that, more than anything, was a beginning. I drove home that night with the windows down, the wind in my hair, the stars bright overhead. I thought about my mother's letters, the words she had left for me, the forgiveness she had never been able to give. I thought about my father, sitting in his cell, trying to become someone new. I thought about Darlene, wherever she was, living a life she had never chosen, running from a past she had never wanted. And I thought about myself, the woman I had been, the woman I was becoming. I pulled into my parking garage and sat in the car for a long moment, the engine off, the silence pressing in on me. I had spent my whole life running from my father, from my past, from the truth about who I was and where I came from. But now, for the first time, I was standing still. And in that stillness, I found something I had been looking for my whole life. I found myself. I walked up to my apartment, the box of my mother's letters tucked under my arm. I poured myself a glass of wine, the same wine I had poured on the night I received my father's first letter, and I sat down at my desk. I opened the box and picked up the next letter. It was marked for the day you find your way home. I smiled. My mother had known. She had always known. I opened the envelope and began to read. My dearest Alexandra, if you are reading this, then you have found your way home. Not the home of your childhood, the one that was sold and paved over and forgotten, but the home that lives inside you. The home that has been waiting for you to find it. I spent my whole life looking for home. I thought it was a place, a house, a lake, a town. But I was wrong. Home is not a place. Home is a feeling of belonging, a feeling of being seen, a feeling of being loved for who you are, not for who you are supposed to be. You are my home, Alexandra. You have always been my home. And I hope, when you read this, that you have found your home too. That you have found a place where you belong. That you have found people who see you, who love you, who accept you for who you are. That you have found a way to be at peace with yourself, with your past, with your future. I am not there with you. I wish I was. I wish I could see the woman you have become. I wish I could tell you how proud I am of you. I wish I could hold your hand one last time and tell you that everything is going to be okay. But I can't. So I am writing this instead. I am writing this to tell you that I love you. That I have always loved you. That I will always love you. No matter what happens. No matter where you go. No matter who you become. You are my daughter. You are my heart. You are my home. With all my love, Mom, I folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope. I sat in my office, the city dark outside my window, the weight of my mother's words settling into my bones. I had spent my whole life looking for home. I had thought it was the lake house, the art collection, the money my father had stolen. But I was wrong. Home was not a place. Home was a feeling of belonging, a feeling of being seen, a feeling of being loved for who I was, not for who I was supposed to be. And for the first time in as long as I could remember, I felt at home. A year passed. A year of letters and visits, of slow, painstaking work, of learning to be a daughter to a man who was learning to be a father. I went to the prison every month, driving the 2 hours from the city, sitting in the same small room, talking to the same man who was slowly, haltingly, becoming someone new. We talked about his classes, the books he was reading, the men he was living with. We talked about my work, the cases I was taking, the clients I was saving. We talked about my mother, the memories we shared, the woman we had both loved and lost. And sometimes, in the quiet moments, when the words ran out and the silence settled between us, we just sat, father and daughter, learning to be still. The letters continued. My father wrote every week, the same thin paper, the same steady hand. But the words were different now. He was not asking for forgiveness. He was not asking for love. He was just writing, telling me about his life, his hopes, his fears. Telling me about the things he was learning, the things he wished he had known, the things he hoped to teach me someday. And at the end of each letter, the same words, I am here. I am trying. I am becoming. I wrote back. Not every week. I was still learning to trust, still learning to let go, but often enough. I told him about my life, my work, my dreams. I told him about the letters my mother had left, the words she had written, the woman she had been. I told him about the lake, the one where she had taught me to swim, the one I visited now when I needed to remember. And sometimes, in the quiet moments, when the words came easily, I told him that I was proud of him, that I was proud of the man he was becoming, that I was proud to be his daughter. The letters from my mother had become a ritual. I read them in the quiet hours of the morning, before the city woke up, before the demands of my work consumed me. I read them in the evenings, after the cases were closed and the clients were gone, when the only light in my office came from the glow of my computer screen. I read them on the weekends, sitting on the shore of the lake where she had taught me to swim, the water dark and still, the trees whispering in the wind. And with each letter, I felt myself healing. Not the quick, sharp healing of a wound that has been stitched closed, but the slow, steady healing of a life that has been broken and is being rebuilt. The last letter was marked for the day you are ready to let me go. I had saved it for last, knowing, somehow, that it would be the hardest to read. I opened it on a Sunday morning, sitting on the shore of the lake, the sun just rising over the water, the world quiet and still. My dearest Alexandra, if you are reading this, then you have read all the letters. You have held my words in your hands, carried them in your heart, let them guide you through the years I could not be there. And now it is time to let me go. This is the hardest letter I have ever written. Harder than the one I wrote when I knew I was dying. Harder than the one I wrote when I knew I would never see you grow up. Because this letter is not about what I am losing. It is about what you are gaining. A life of your own. A future of your own. A chance to be the woman you were always meant to be, without me holding you back. I know you have carried me with you. In your heart. In your memories. In the choices you have made and the life you have built. And I am grateful. More grateful than I can ever say. But it is time to put me down. It is time to let go of the grief, the guilt, the weight of the years. It is time to live your life, not in my shadow, but in your own light. You are not my daughter anymore, Alexandra. You are a woman. A woman who has fought, who has survived, who has become something extraordinary. And I want you to know that I see you. I see the woman you have become. I see the strength, the courage, the love that has always been inside you. And I am proud. Prouder than I have ever been of anything. So let me go. Let the grief go. Let the guilt go. Let the weight of the years go. And live. Live the life you were always meant to live. Love the people you were always meant to love. Become the woman you were always meant to become. I will be with you always. Not as a memory. Not as a ghost. But as a part of you. The part that has always been there, waiting for you to find it. With all my love, Mom, I folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope. I sat on the shore of the lake, the sun now fully risen, the water sparkling in the light, and I let the tears come. Not tears of grief. Not tears of loss. Tears of release. Tears of gratitude. Tears for the woman who had given me life and the life I was finally ready to live. I stayed on the shore for a long time, watching the water, listening to the wind, feeling the sun on my face. And when I finally stood up to go home, I felt lighter than I had in years. I had let her go. Not because I didn't love her, but because I did. Because I loved her enough to let her rest. Because I loved myself enough to live. The months that followed were different. I was different. I went to work, but I didn't stay late. I took on cases, but I didn't let them consume me. I started saying yes to the things that mattered and no to the things that didn't. I started cooking again, something I hadn't done since my mother died. I started calling old friends, the ones I had lost touch with when I buried myself in work. I started dating, tentatively, awkwardly, learning to be vulnerable in ways I had never allowed myself to be. I started living. And slowly, almost without noticing, I started to heal. The letters from my father continued. One a week, every week, written on the same thin paper, in the same steady hand. He told me about the classes he was taking, the books he was reading, the men he was living with. He told me about the things he was learning, the things he wished he had known, the things he hoped to teach me someday. And at the end of each letter, the same words, I am here. I am trying. I am becoming. I wrote back. Every week now. I told him about my life, my work, my dreams. I told him about the lake, the one where my mother had taught me to swim, the one I visited now to remember. I told him about the cases I was taking, the clients I was saving, the difference I was making in the world. And sometimes, in the quiet moments, I told him that I loved him, that I was proud of him, that I was proud to be his daughter. He was released from prison 18 months later. His sentence had been reduced for good behavior, for the classes he had taken, for the work he had done. He walked out of the gates on a Friday morning, the sun bright, the sky clear, the world waiting for him. I was there to meet him. He looked different than he had the last time I saw him. Not younger, the years in prison had aged him in ways that would never reverse, but freer. Lighter. He walked out of the gates with a small bag in his hand, a cardboard box under his arm, and he looked up at the sky like a man who had been living underground and was seeing the sun for the first time. I walked toward him. He saw me, and for a moment, he froze. Then he smiled. A real smile. The kind of smile I hadn't seen on his face since I was a child. Alexandra, he said. Dad, I said. We stood there for a moment, father and daughter, the gates of the prison behind us, the world in front of us. And then he opened his arms, and I walked into them. I had spent my whole life running from this man. From his ambition, his lies, his betrayal. But now, standing in his arms, I realized that I had been running from myself. From the daughter who still loved him. From the woman who wanted to believe that people could change. From the person I was becoming. "I'm proud of you," I said. "I'm proud of the man you've become." He held me tighter. "I'm proud of you too. I've always been proud of you. I just didn't know how to say it." We stood there for a long time, holding each other, the silence between us no longer a wall but a bridge. And when we finally let go, I saw something in his eyes that I had never seen before. Peace. I drove him to the apartment I had rented for him, a small place near the lake, where he could start again. He looked around at the rooms, the furniture, the view of the water, and I saw the tears in his eyes. "It's not much," I said. "But it's a start." "It's everything," he said. "It's more than I deserve." I shook my head. "It's what you need. What we both need. A chance to start again. To build something new. Something that's ours." He nodded slowly. "What do we build?" I looked at him, at this man who had spent his life building empires that crumbled, and I smiled. "We build a family. A real one. Not an empire. Not a legacy. Just a family. Two people who love each other. Who are learning to trust each other. Who are becoming something new." He reached out and took my hand. "I'd like that. I'd like that very much." We spent the rest of the day together, unpacking his boxes, arranging his furniture, making the apartment a home. We talked about the years we had lost, the years we hoped to gain. We talked about my mother, the woman we had both loved, the woman who had left us with a legacy of letters and love. And we talked about the future, the one we were building together, one day at a time. That evening, I drove back to the city, the windows down, the wind in my hair, the stars bright overhead. I thought about my mother's letters, the words she had left for me, the forgiveness she had never been able to give. I thought about my father, sitting in his new apartment by the lake, learning to be the man he should have been. I thought about Darlene, wherever she was, living a life she had never chosen, running from a past she had never wanted. And I thought about myself, the woman I had been, the woman I was becoming. I pulled into my parking garage and sat in the car for a long moment, the engine off, the silence pressing in on me. I had spent my whole life running from my father, from my past, from the truth about who I was and where I came from. But now, for the first time, I was standing still. And in that stillness, I found something I had been looking for my whole life. I found peace. I walked up to my apartment, the box of my mother's letters tucked under my arm. I poured myself a glass of wine, the same wine I had poured on the night I received my father's first letter, and I sat down at my desk. I opened the box and looked at the letters one last time. Dozens of envelopes, each one addressed in my mother's handwriting, each one marked with a date or an occasion. I had read them all. I had held her words in my hands. I had let them guide me through the years she could not be there. And now it was time to let them go. I closed the box and placed it on the shelf where I kept the things I would always carry with me. The photograph of my mother and father, standing in front of the lake house, young and in love. The first letter my father had written me, the one that had started all of this. The small wooden box that held my mother's rings, the one she had worn every day of her life. And now, the letters. The words she had left for me. The love she had given me. The life she had hoped I would live. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I knew by heart. My father answered on the first ring. "Alexandra," he said. His voice was warm, familiar, the voice of a man who had found his way home. "Dad," I said. "I just wanted to say goodnight." He was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was thick with emotion. "I'm glad you called. I was just sitting here, looking at the lake, thinking about your mother. About the life we had. About the life we could have had if I had been different. I looked out the window at the city lights below, at the stars above. We can't change the past, Dad. We can only change the future. And I'm looking forward to seeing what we build." "I am too," he said. "I am too." We talked for a while longer, about nothing and everything, the words flowing easily between us. And when we finally said goodnight, I felt something I hadn't felt in Years. I felt hope. I put the phone down and walked to the window. The city was spread out before me, a grid of light and shadow, of lives being lived and futures being built. Somewhere out there, Darlene was still running. Somewhere out there, my father was learning to stand still. And somewhere out there, my mother was watching, her words still echoing in my heart, her love still guiding me home. I thought about the last line of her last letter. I will be with you always. Not as a memory, not as a ghost, but as a part of you. The part that has always been there, waiting for you to find it. I had found it. I had found her. I had found myself. I turned off the lights and climbed into bed, the city still humming outside my window, the stars still bright overhead. I closed my eyes and let the darkness wrap around me, not as an ending, but as a beginning. Tomorrow, I would wake up to a new day, a new life, a new chance to be the woman I was always meant to be. But tonight, I would rest. I would let the past go. I would let the future come. And I would sleep, knowing that I was finally, after a lifetime of running, home. This story is not just about revenge. It is about truth, pain, and rising stronger than before. If this hit your heart, then you know what to do. Like the video, drop your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more real stories that burn like fire. Until next time, stay sharp, stay loud, stay rebel.